Silas Crow did not knock. He never knocked. He walked into whatever room he wanted, took whatever was his, and left the wreckage for other people to sort through. That was how he had lived for 53 years, and that was how he walked into the general store on a Tuesday afternoon in Harlan Creek and grabbed the thin woman behind the counter by the wrist, so hard she knocked over a jar of buttons. "You're coming back," he said. Not a question, not a request. A statement delivered the way a man hammers a nail one blow, meant to end the discussion. The woman, pale, flinching, her eyes darting to the door, said nothing. She had learned that saying nothing was the safest with Silas Crow. But across the street, a boy of 9 years old had been watching through the dusty glass of the feed store window, and the boy was already running. If someone had told you the woman you buried 7 years ago was standing in the middle of town alive, breathing, wearing another man's cast-offs, what would you do? Would you run toward her? Would you tell yourself it wasn't possible? Would you listen to the town that called you a fool? Or would you trust the 9-year-old child who never knew his mother but somehow recognized the song she used to hum? That is the question Caleb Whitmore faced on a Thursday afternoon in the autumn of 1887. And everything, every cold year, every empty night, every grave he never dug, because there was no body to put in it, came down to what he did in the next 10 seconds. If this story moves something in you, if it reminds you that people are worth fighting for, even when the world says to let them go, subscribe to this channel before we go any further. Hit the like button. Leave a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. These stories travel farther than I ever expected, and I want to know how far this one goes. Now let's go back to the beginning. Caleb Whitmore had not always been a hard man. There was a version of him younger, easier in his own skin, capable of laughing at things that were genuinely funny, that the people of Harlan Creek still remembered in the abstract, the way you remember weather from several years ago. You know it happened. You can't quite feel it anymore. That version of Caleb had arrived in the Montana Territory at 26 years old with $300, a borrowed horse, and enough stubbornness to outlast 2 bad winters and 1 dishonest land surveyor. By 29, he had the beginnings of a real cattle operation. By 31, the Whitmore Ranch was pulling enough weight to make him a man worth knowing in Harlan Creek, not wealthy by Eastern standards, but solid, dependable, the kind of man other ranchers asked for an opinion before making a decision. What he didn't have was a wife. His mother, back in Ohio, had written him a letter in the spring of 1879 that was equal parts practical and gently pointed. She had found a woman willing to correspond with him, a schoolteacher's daughter from Pennsylvania named Amelia Carter, 24 years old, intelligent, not easily frightened, looking for a life that meant something beyond the narrow circumstances she'd been handed. His mother described her as someone who asked good questions and didn't pretend to know things she didn't. Caleb wrote back. Amelia wrote back. For 8 months they exchanged letters that got longer and more honest as the correspondence continued, until Caleb found himself looking forward to the mail the way a man in a drought looks forward to clouds. He proposed by letter. She accepted by letter. She arrived by stagecoach on a Wednesday morning in April of 1880, carrying a trunk, a small canvas bag, and an expression that was trying to appear calmer than it felt. He recognized her immediately, not because she matched the description he'd built in his head, but because she was looking at everything at once. The mountains, the mud, the storefronts with their hand-painted signs, the horses tied along the rail. She was paying attention to the world she'd come to, not waiting for it to impress her. He liked that immediately. "You're Caleb Whitmore," she said when she saw him. "I am," he said. "You're smaller than I expected." She looked at him without blinking. "You're quieter than your letters." He almost smiled. "Give me time." They were married 6 days later in the front room of the county clerk's office, with 2 ranch hands as witnesses and the clerk's wife supplying a small bouquet of wildflowers. Nobody had asked for, but everyone appreciated. It wasn't a romantic wedding by any definition Amelia had grown up with, but she had not come west looking for romance. She had come looking for something real. She found it. The first year was difficult in the ordinary ways that first years are difficult, 2 people learning the habits and moods of another person, negotiating the small territories of a shared life. Amelia was not a rancher's wife by training, but she was thorough and observant, and she learned quickly. She picked up the patterns of the cattle operation, the rhythm of the seasons, the names and temperaments of every hand Caleb employed. She started keeping the ranch's financial records because she had better handwriting and caught an arithmetic error that would have cost them $60 at the cattle brokers. Caleb noticed. He was not a man who expressed appreciation easily, but he stopped pretending he was doing her a favor by explaining things, and that was its own kind of acknowledgement. By the end of the second year, Amelia was pregnant. Noah arrived in March of 1882, small and furious, and immediately in charge of everything. Caleb, who had not been sure he wanted children, and had certainly not been sure he would know what to do with one, found himself completely undone by this small person who looked at him with total trust and expected to be held. He held him. He held him more than was strictly necessary. He didn't tell anyone. For 3 years, the Whitmore Ranch was the kind of place people describe when they're trying to explain what they were hoping for when they came west. Not perfect, the cattle market dropped 2 seasons running. A late frost killed the kitchen garden. One of the hands had to be let go for stealing feed, but real. Functional. A life with weight to it. Then came the October of 1885. Amelia had gone into Harlan Creek for supplies: flour, lamp oil, a specific bolt of wool fabric she'd been waiting 3 weeks for. Noah was 4 years old and staying at the ranch with the cook, a sturdy woman named Dora who had been with the operation since before Caleb owned it. The weather had looked manageable in the morning. By afternoon, it had become something else entirely. Storm came from the north with almost no warning. The kind of storm that happens in Montana in October, and shouldn't surprise anyone but always does: sudden, total. The temperature dropping 15 degrees in an hour, the sky going the color of a bruise. Caleb was out checking the eastern fence line when the first wind hit. Turned back immediately. Amelia did not make it home. The search lasted 4 days. Caleb went out himself the first 2, covering ground in widening circles from the road, calling her name until his voice gave out. Other men from town joined the effort. They found the supply wagon overturned in a gully 2 miles from the ranch, the horse gone, the goods scattered and buried in snow. They found her shawl caught on a branch. They found nothing else. After 4 days, the sheriff said what everyone was thinking. Caleb. The temperature that first night, I know what the temperature was, Caleb said. Nobody could have survived that. Not out in the open. Caleb sat with that for a long time. He did not cry in front of the sheriff, or in front of his ranch hands, or in front of anyone in Harlan Creek. He cried once, late at night, sitting in the chair Amelia had placed beside the window because she said she liked watching the sky while she nursed Noah. Cried until there was nothing left, and then he stopped, and he did not cry again. He raised Noah. He ran the ranch. He became efficient and methodical and somewhat frightening in his thoroughness, the way a man becomes when he has decided that feelings are a liability he can no longer afford. Noah grew. He was a quiet child, curious with his mother's habit of paying close attention to things. He asked about her sometimes, and Caleb answered as honestly as he could, without saying anything he didn't know for certain. He did not tell Noah his mother was in heaven, because he didn't know that. He said she had been lost in a storm. He said she had been kind and smart. He said she had loved Noah before Noah was old enough to know what love meant. By the autumn of 1887, Noah was 5 years old. No, he was approaching 9, and Caleb was 38, and the ranch was larger than it had ever been. And Caleb had become exactly the kind of man he had been afraid of becoming: competent, respected, and fundamentally alone. He went into Harlan Creek every 2 weeks for business. He did not linger. He completed his transactions, exchanged the minimum necessary conversation with the people he owed courtesy to, and went home. He was crossing the main street on a Thursday afternoon in the 3rd week of October 2 years, to the month after Amelia disappeared, when Noah, who had come along because Caleb occasionally allowed it, stopped walking. Just stopped. The way a dog stops when it hears something a human can't. "Papa, come on," Caleb said, not looking back. The second time was different, quieter, but with something in it that made Caleb turn around. Noah was standing still in the middle of the street, staring toward the far edge of the boardwalk, near the gap between the tailor shop and the old assay office. There was a woman there, sitting on an overturned crate with her knees together and her hands folded in her lap. She was wearing a dress that had once been gray and was now a color with no name faded past itself, patched in 3 places. The hem turned up and restitched so many times the bottom edge had become stiff. Her hair was covered with a scarf that didn't quite hide the gray that had come in early. She was looking at the ground. She was humming something. Caleb heard it a half-second after Noah said the words, and the sound of it did something to the inside of his chest that he had no immediate explanation for. Papa. That's Mama. The humming was barely audible. A few notes, repeated. The melody of a lullaby that Amelia had made up, not taken from any songbook, not something she'd learned from her own mother, but something she had assembled from nothing in the first weeks after Noah was born and sung to him every night in a particular order that Caleb had heard so many times it had become part of the architecture of the house. He had never told anyone else what that lullaby sounded like. He had never written it down. He had not heard it in 2 years. He walked toward the woman slowly. The way you approach something you're afraid will disappear if you move too fast. She didn't look up. She was thin in a way that suggested not just poverty but a longer deprivation, the kind that settles into the body and changes the way a person holds themselves. Her wrists, visible below the cuffs of her dress, were too narrow. There was a fading bruise on the left one, wide and yellow at the edges. "Ma'am," Caleb said. She looked up. The face was wrong. 7 years had passed, not just time but hard time, the kind that doesn't maintain anything, that takes from you incrementally and does not give back. The woman looking up at him was not the woman he had last seen kissing him goodbye on a Wednesday morning in October. That woman had been young in the way people are young when they haven't been truly tested yet. This face had been tested thoroughly. But the eyes. He had not expected the eyes to be the same. "Do you need help?" he said, because he couldn't say anything else yet. His throat had done something he didn't understand. She looked at him without answering. There was something in her expression that he couldn't read. Not quite fear. Not quite recognition, not quite either of those things, but something that lived in the space between them. Noah had come up beside him. He was standing close enough to touch Caleb's hand, and he was looking at the woman with an expression of absolute certainty. "It's her, Papa," he said. "It's the humming. Noah, you told me. You said she sang the same song every night. You said it was just hers." He paused. "I remember you humming it sometimes, when you thought I was asleep." Caleb had not known Noah had ever heard that. He crouched down so he was level with the woman's eyeline. Up close, the changes were more specific and more devastating. A scar ran along her right temple that hadn't been there before. Her hands, the hands he remembered as careful and precise, always busy with something, were roughened and cracked across the knuckles. "What's your name?" he said. She looked at him for a long time. "They called me Ruth," she said. Her voice was rough, as though it hadn't been used much lately. "What do you call yourself?" Another pause, longer this time. "Did something complicated." "I don't know," she said. "I've been trying to remember." Caleb stood up. He was aware of people watching 2 women who had stopped on the boardwalk. A man leaning in the doorway of the hardware store, pretending to look at nothing. Harlan Creek was not a large town. Word traveled the way water traveled, quickly, seeking the lowest ground. He didn't care. "Can you stand?" he said to the woman. She stood. Not easily, she was stiff, favoring one side slightly, but she stood. He looked at Noah. Noah looked back at him with the calm certainty of someone who has not yet been taught to doubt his own instincts. "Come with us," Caleb said to the woman who called herself Ruth. "There's a place you can sit properly and have something to eat." She followed him without another word. He didn't understand yet what he had just done, what he was walking into. He would understand it over the next several days, when the consequences of those 3 words, "come with us," unfolded across Harlan Creek with the speed and thoroughness of a grass fire. He would understand it when Marcus Vale came to the ranch that first evening with 3 other men and a lawyer's letter. He would understand it when the sheriff arrived, and when the newspaper printed something speculative and unkind, and when people who had been pleasant to him for years suddenly found reasons to look away. But that was later. Right now, in the middle of the street on a Thursday afternoon, he was walking his son and a thin woman in a ruined dress toward his wagon, and the woman was humming, and the melody was one he had heard 10,000 times in the only years of his life that had ever felt whole. Told himself he was not certain. He had to tell himself that, because the alternative that she was who Noah said she was, that she had been alive somewhere for 2 years, while he slowly learned to be a man without her, was not something he could absorb standing up in the middle of a street with people watching. He focused on the wagon. He focused on Noah's hand in his. He focused on putting one boot in front of the other across the mud of the main street. And behind him, the woman who called herself Ruth hummed the last bars of the lullaby and then went quiet, as though she were afraid of what she had just given away. She had reason to be afraid. She had been afraid for 2 years, more or less without interruption. What she didn't know yet, what neither of them knew yet, was that the fear was about to change shape entirely. It had been the dull, grinding fear of a person who has accepted captivity as the condition of their survival. It was about to become something sharper and more immediate, the fear of a woman who has been found, who is not sure yet whether being found is safe, who has a history she cannot fully access and a present she cannot fully trust. But it would also, underneath all of that, become something else, something she had not felt in a very long time, the specific quality of fear that comes not from danger but from hope. They rode back to the ranch mostly in silence. Noah sat between them on the wagon bench, which was either coincidence or strategy Caleb had not decided yet. The boy was 9 years old and occasionally inscrutable. He asked the woman one question during the 40-minute ride. "Do you like horses?" She considered this for a moment. "Think I did once," she said. "I'm not sure I remember enough to know." "That's okay," Noah said. "I'll introduce you to ours." They remember people. The woman looked down at him. Something moved across her face that Caleb caught in his peripheral vision. Something that came and went too quickly to name. "Thank you," she said. At the ranch, Dora still there, still sturdy. Still the person who had been holding the household together through sheer competence and force of will opened the back door and stopped completely when she saw who was following Caleb and Noah up the steps. She didn't say anything for a full 5 seconds. Then she said, "Lord have mercy," which was not something Dora said, and she stepped back and held the door open. Caleb brought the woman Ruth. He was still calling her Ruth in his own head, because the alternative required a certainty he hadn't earned yet to the table in the kitchen, and poured her a glass of water, which she drank in one long pull without looking up. Poured another one. Dora, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone managing something fragile, put a plate of cold cornbread and a bowl of bean soup in front of her without asking. The woman ate. Not quickly, not the way a desperately hungry person eats, grabbing and swallowing, but with the focused attention of someone who had learned to take food seriously, to not assume there would be more of it. Caleb sat across from her and watched and tried not to look like he was watching. "You said you've been trying to remember," he said when she had gotten through most of the soup. "How long has that been going on?" She looked at him across the table. "A while," she said. "Longer than I can count from the outside." "Where were you before the street today?" A long pause. Her hands wrapped around the water glass tightened slightly. "Mountains," she said. "North of here, a long way north." "Whose place?" "Another plonger." "A man named Crow," she said. Silas Crow. Caleb did not know that name. He would learn it thoroughly in the coming weeks. But right now it landed as simply a name, 2 words, a man. "North of here." "How long?" he said. She looked at the table. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, 2 years. And something in the way she said it made it clear she was not just reporting a duration. 2 years was a whole other thing she wasn't saying yet. "Before that," he said carefully. She lifted her eyes to him. They were the same eyes. He was more sure of that now, the color, the steadiness, the way they assessed something before the rest of the face committed to a reaction. "Before that, I don't remember clearly," she said. "There was a storm. Cold. There was waking up somewhere that wasn't where I'd been." She paused. "There are pieces. They come in pieces." "What kind of pieces?" She turned the water glass in her hands, once, twice. "A boy," she said, "a child. Not Crow's not from up there. Somewhere before. A child who smelled like hay and wood smoke." She stopped. "And a room, a bedroom with rose wallpaper." Caleb's hands flat on the table did not move. He had chosen that wallpaper. He had not chosen it. Amelia had chosen it from a catalog sample the dry goods store had on loan for a week, and she had held it up and said, slightly embarrassed, "I know it's impractical." And he had said, "Get it." And she had looked at him with an expression that was more than the wallpaper warranted. He had kept that wallpaper after she disappeared. It was still in the bedroom. He had not been able to take it down. "Rose wallpaper," he said. "Yes." She looked at him. "Is that important?" He considered lying. He was a man who had occasionally found lying useful, professionally if not personally. But he looked at her across the kitchen table in the amber light of the late afternoon, and he said, "That's the wallpaper in the bedroom of this house." Stared at him. "The room at the top of the stairs," he said. "Second door on the right." Something happened in her eyes. Not a flood, nothing that dramatic. Something quieter than that, and in some ways worse. Like a door opening onto a room that's been locked for a long time, and the air that comes out isn't fresh. It's just the air that's been sitting in the dark waiting. What's my name, she said, barely audible. He said, Amelia. Your name is Amelia Carter Whitmore. She closed her eyes. Noah had been standing in the doorway of the kitchen for the last 10 minutes, listening. He came in now, without asking permission, and sat down in the chair beside her, the chair closest to her, his small shoulder almost touching her arm, and didn't say anything at all. He just sat there present, the way a child sometimes is present, in a way that adults have mostly unlearned. She didn't open her eyes for another minute. When she did, she looked at Noah first, then at Caleb. I'm not sure, she said. I want to be sure, but I'm not. That's fine, Caleb said. It's not fine, she said. It's not fine at all. It's terrible. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I'm sorry, she said. Don't apologize, he said. You haven't done anything wrong. I don't know what I've done, she said. That's the problem. She was right. It was the problem. It would remain the problem for a long time, the gap between what had happened to her and what she could access. The pieces coming in at angles, not in order, not in a narrative that made sense from the outside, but the rose wallpaper, and the lullaby, and the way Noah had stopped in the middle of the street as if he'd heard something the rest of the world couldn't hear. Caleb Whitmore was not a man who acted on certainty he hadn't earned, but he was also not a man who could stand in front of evidence this consistent and pretend he didn't know what it was pointing toward. He stood up. Dora will show you to a room, he said. There's a wash basin and clean linens. You can sleep. Tamari paused. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. She looked at him with those eyes. Why are you doing this? She said. You don't know me. He picked up his hat from the hook by the door. I might, he said. And he went outside, because he needed the cold air, and because there was a part of him that was not as controlled as he was presenting himself to be, and he was not ready for her to see that yet. He stood on the porch in the early dark of the October evening and listened to the wind move through the dry grass on the hillside and tried to breathe steadily. He had not been certain about anything in 2 years. He was not certain now. But the lullaby was still in his ears, and the rose wallpaper was in the room upstairs, and Noah was sitting beside a stranger at the kitchen table, with the complete confidence of a child who trusts what he knows. Caleb stayed on the porch for a long time. The first stars came out. He went back inside. Marcus Vale arrived at the ranch the following morning before breakfast. He came with 2 other men, his foreman, Garrett, and a third man Caleb recognized as Edgar Binns, who handled legal matters for several of the larger landowners in the county. It was a considered choice of company. Vale never did anything without considering its effect in advance. Caleb met them at the gate. You heard quickly, he said. Word travels, Vale said. He was 51, heavy-set, with the kind of groomed authority that came from decades of having money slightly before the people around him. He had the rancher's habit of looking at other people's land and assessing it. He was assessing the Whitmore Ranch now, casually, the way he always did. Concerned about you, Caleb. I appreciate that, Caleb said, in a tone that made clear he didn't. I'm not sure you understand what you've brought into your home. Vale shifted, settling his weight. Stranger. An unknown woman with no documentation to speak for her. No account of where she's been, or who she is. And you're telling people, he paused. Your boy is telling people she's your dead wife. Noah said what he observed. Noah is 9 years old. He's right about that, Caleb said. Vale's jaw tightened slightly. He didn't like being deflected by simplicity, Caleb. You lost Amelia 2 years ago. I know that's been hard. Nobody holds that grief against you. But bringing this woman here. I brought a woman who needed shelter, Caleb said. I do that sometimes. Not like this. What would you like me to have done, Marcus? Left her there? I'd like you to have thought it through, Vale said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite concern and not quite authority, but something that lived uncomfortably between them. There are consequences here. For your reputation. For the ranch's reputation. He paused, and then added, with the practiced restraint of a man choosing his words carefully, and for the estate, should questions arise about Amelia's legal status. Caleb looked at him. It was a long look, the kind that makes people explain themselves. Vale did not explain himself. He was too practiced for that. Thank you for coming out, Caleb said. I'll think through what you've said. Caleb, I'll think through it, he said again, and the finality in his voice was the kind that closed doors. He turned and walked back toward the house. Behind him he heard Vale say something to Binns in a low voice. He didn't catch the words, but he caught the tone, and the tone told him more than the words would have anyway. Marcus Vale was not concerned about Caleb. Marcus Vale was concerned about something else entirely. Caleb filed that away and went inside. By the third day, she had begun to remember things in a different way, not in pieces or not only in pieces. Some things came back as complete rooms rather than corners of rooms. She woke up on the third morning and told Caleb, over the breakfast table, that she remembered the name of his first horse, a paint stallion named Hector. She remembered that Caleb had named him after a character in a book he'd carried west from Ohio, and that she had teased him about it because the horse had none of the qualities she associated with that name. Caleb set down his coffee cup. Hector died 6 months after you disappeared, he said. He had bad knees, she said. He did. She looked at him. You're shaking. He looked at his hands. He was. Slightly barely visible, but she had caught it. No, I'm not, he said. She said Caleb. He looked up. It was the first time she had said his name. Not his full name. Not his surname, just Caleb. The way she used to say it. Not asking for anything. Just placing it in the air between them as a fact. He did not shake after that, because he made himself stop. But it took most of his attention for the next several minutes. That afternoon, she asked to see the bedroom. He led her upstairs. He opened the door. She stood in the doorway for a long time and looked at the rose wallpaper. He watched her face. What crossed it was not a dramatic thing, not a flood of tears, not a sudden collapse. It was quieter and more fundamental. Recognition arriving not as an event, but as a weight. Something settling back into its original position after being displaced for a long time, making a small sound on its way down. Put her hand flat against the wallpaper. Then she turned around and looked at Caleb, and she said, there was a rocking chair by the window. I moved it to the barn, he said. Couldn't he stopped? I moved it. She nodded slowly. I rocked him there, she said, every night, the song. I know, he said. He remembered it, she said, not a question. He stopped me in the middle of the street, Caleb said. 2 years later, he heard 12 notes from across the street and stopped. She looked at the wallpaper again. Then she said something he wasn't expecting. I knew I had someone to go back to, she said. Even when I couldn't remember who. I knew there was somewhere else. That was the only, she paused. That was the only thing Crow couldn't take. He took the name. He took the time. But I knew there was somewhere I was supposed to be. Caleb said nothing. He wasn't capable of saying anything useful right then, so he said nothing. I'm sorry I couldn't get back faster, she said. Don't, he said. Don't apologize for that. I'm apologizing for what it cost you, she said. Noah didn't. Noah is fine, he said. Noah is better than fine. He's the one who found you. Something in her face shifted, something soft and complicated, and she looked at the floor for a moment. Crow told me she was dead, she said. The woman I'd been. He said I'd been out in the storm for too long, that I'd damaged something, that the person I'd been before wasn't coming back. He said I should be grateful. Her voice was flat, delivering facts without decoration. He was convincing when you can't remember. Someone else's certainty fills the space. He was wrong, Caleb said. Yes, she said. But it took a long time to understand that. Turned away from the wallpaper. She had taken something from it, accomplished whatever she'd needed to accomplish by standing in front of it, and now she was done. She walked past him toward the door. I should help Dora with supper, she said. You don't have to. I want to, she said. I've been useless for long enough. I'd like to be useful. She went downstairs. He stayed in the doorway of the bedroom and looked at the rose wallpaper for a minute longer, and then he went downstairs too, because the ranch needed managing, and because standing in a room feeling things that didn't have names yet was not, in the long run, going to help anyone. The name was still in his ears. Just his name, said in a particular way, placing itself in the air between them. It was enough. For now it was more than enough. Outside, the October wind moved through the dry grass on the hillside, and the horses moved in the paddock below the house. And somewhere inside the ranch kitchen, a woman who had been lost for 2 years was helping make supper. The Whitmore Ranch went about its business, but nothing was the same. And Marcus Vale, 8 miles away in his office, was writing a letter to a man whose name Caleb had not yet heard, making arrangements that had nothing to do with concern for anyone's welfare and everything to do with the specific arithmetic of land and inheritance and legal status. The trouble that was coming was not finished with any of them yet. It had barely started. The letter from Edgar Binns arrived on a Monday morning, 4 days after Caleb had brought the woman home. It was written in the careful, measured language of a man who understood that words on paper outlasted the conversations that preceded them. It informed Caleb Whitmore that certain parties had raised concerns regarding the legal and personal welfare of an unidentified woman currently residing on the Whitmore Ranch property. It noted that in the absence of verifiable documentation establishing this woman's identity, The county held responsibility to ensure she was residing voluntarily and under no duress. Requested that Caleb present the woman referred to throughout as the individual in question, never by name, to a hearing before Justice Alderman Holt within the week. Caleb read it twice at the kitchen table, then set it down flat. Dora, who had been watching from the corner of the kitchen, where she was rolling biscuit dough, said, "Vale?" "Vale," Caleb confirmed. "That man has been looking for a reason since before Amelia disappeared," Dora said. She said the name without flinching, the way she'd been saying it for 4 days, which was more than Caleb had managed. "He wants the Eastern grazing rights. You know that." "I know that. He can't get them while your ranch is legally whole." She turned the dough over. "A missing wife creates complications. A dead wife creates an estate. An estate creates opportunities for men with lawyers on retainer." Caleb looked at the letter again. "She needs to know about this," he said. "She's in the garden," Dora said. "She's been out there since first light." He found her at the far end of the kitchen garden, crouched in the dirt beside what was left of the late-season cabbages. She had found a pair of old work gloves somewhere, probably the barn, and was pulling weeds from between the rows with the focused, economical attention of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. She had been doing small tasks like this since the second day, quietly, without being asked, without announcing herself, just finding the things that needed doing and doing them. He crouched down beside her and held out the letter. She read it without touching it, leaning slightly forward to see the words. When she finished, she sat back on her heels. "He's moving fast," she said. "He is. He was at the gate the day after you brought me here," she said. Not a question. Caleb had not told her about Vale's visit, but she had seen the men at the gate from the upstairs window. She had not asked about it until now. "What does he want?" "He wants the ranch to be in legal uncertainty," Caleb said. "A dead wife, a grieving widower, an estate that can be picked apart that's useful to him. A living wife with legal standing is less useful." She looked at the letter again. "What's the date of the hearing?" she said. "Friday, that's 4 days. Yes." She pulled another weed from between the cabbage rows. Came out root and all, and she shook the dirt from it and set it aside. "What do I need to bring?" she said. "Amelia, what do I need to bring, Caleb?" He was quiet for a moment. "Anything that proves who you are. Anything you remember. Anyone who can speak to it. The judge will want something he can point to. Something that isn't just your word or mine." She nodded slowly, processing this. "The doll," she said. "What?" "I had a doll in my bag when they found me on the street. A small cloth doll with a blue dress. I made it." She paused. "I remember making it. I remember what I used to stuff it. I ran out of cotton batting and used dried lavender instead, so it smelled like that for years afterward. I remember thinking it was impractical, but I liked it." She looked at him. "Do you remember it?" "I know the doll," Caleb said. His voice had gone careful. "It was in a box in Noah's room. He'd been keeping it." Something moved across her face at that. "Brief and complicated. He kept it," she said. "He didn't want to throw anything away." She pressed her lips together and looked back at the garden. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, deliberately steady, the way a voice gets when the person is managing something carefully. "Then we have the doll," she said, "and whatever else we can find." The town did not take the situation quietly. Harlan Creek had a population of approximately 412 people, depending on the time of year and whether you counted the families in the outlying homesteads. It had 2 churches, a school, a saloon that stayed respectable by frontier standards, and a social infrastructure of gossip that operated with the efficiency of a well-maintained telegraph line. By Tuesday afternoon, 5 days after Caleb had brought the woman home, there were at least 4 competing versions of the story circulating through the town's various establishments. The most charitable version held that Caleb had found a confused woman who bore some resemblance to his late wife and had taken her in out of genuine if misguided compassion. The least charitable version, circulated primarily through the social circles that orbited Marcus Vale's household, held that the woman was an opportunist who had identified a grieving widower with a profitable ranch and was exploiting the situation with calculated skill. Neither version made room for the possibility that she was actually Amelia Carter Whitmore. That possibility was, by the general consensus of Harlan Creek's opinion-forming classes, too improbable to take seriously. Caleb heard these versions secondhand from his ranch hand Wyatt Boone, who went into town for supplies on Tuesday and came back with a careful, neutral account of what people were saying. Wyatt had worked for Caleb for 5 years. He was a compact, precise man in his early 40s who had the rare ability to deliver unpleasant information without editorializing, which Caleb had always valued. Vale's been talking to people, Wyatt said. He was unsaddling his horse in the barn, not looking at Caleb directly, which meant the information was worse than his tone was indicating. Not just the lawyer. He's been talking to the reverend, to some of the older families. Making a case that you need his word was guidance. Guidance, Caleb repeated. He used it 3 times, apparently. Someone counted. What kind of guidance? Wyatt finally looked at him. Kind that would result in the woman being removed from your property and placed somewhere appropriate while her identity is officially unclear. Somewhere appropriate meaning somewhere Vale's people can manage the situation, Caleb said. That would be my reading of it, Wyatt said. Caleb was quiet for a moment, watching Wyatt finish with the saddle. She's been in the garden every morning, Caleb said. She's been helping Dora with the household accounts. She corrected an error in the feed ledger yesterday that would have cost us $40 by spring. He paused. She did it without being asked, without saying anything about it. She just fixed it and put the ledger back. Wyatt considered this. She remember how to do the books, apparently. Amelia used to do the books, Wyatt said. She did. That's something, Wyatt said. He picked up his saddle and moved it to the rack. $40 is $40. It was not a grand declaration. But from Wyatt, who was not in the business of grand declarations, it was the equivalent of a sworn affidavit. Caleb about the scar that night. They were in the front room after supper. Noah had gone to bed. Dora had retired. And the 2 of them were sitting near the stove in the particular silence that had developed between them over the past several days. It was not a comfortable silence exactly, but it was an honest one. Neither of them was pretending to be at ease. She had been looking at her left forearm. Not obviously, but he'd noticed. She had a habit of touching it sometimes, unconsciously, when she thought he wasn't watching. There was an accident, she said, without preamble, with a piece of fence rail. She paused, before the storm. I was helping with a repair and a nail pulled out of a board, and the rail came back and caught my arm. It needed stitching. Caleb looked at her arm. She turned it slightly, presenting the underside. There was a scar there, white and slightly raised, 4 inches long, running parallel to the bone. Old enough to have settled completely into the skin. Doc Reeves stitched it, Caleb said. A man with cold hands and iodine that smelled like something had died in it, she said. That's Reeves. He told me it would leave a mark, and I told him I didn't care, she said. He seemed personally offended by that. He did, Caleb said. He mentioned it to me afterward. He said your wife had no appreciation for the craft of wound closure. She looked at him, and then unexpectedly, without warning, she almost laughed. It was a short sound, barely there, and it surprised her as much as it surprised him. Pressed her hand to her mouth. I remember saying something like that, she said. I remember thinking he was being ridiculous. He was being ridiculous, Caleb said. She looked down at her arm again. The almost laughter had passed, but something from it remained some slight easing. Scar is still there, she said. It is. Crow never questioned it, she said. Her voice had changed. The ease was gone now, replaced by something more careful. He never asked about it. He didn't care where I'd come from. Not really. Cared that I was there and that I worked and that I didn't cause problems. She paused. I think he convinced himself that the life I had before didn't matter, that it had been reset, that I was just a person he'd found, and that was the beginning of the story. He was wrong about that, Caleb said. Yes, she said, but it's a useful thing to tell yourself when you've done what he did. She looked at the stove. The fire was getting low, and she leaned forward and opened the grate and added another piece of wood with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times. It was such a specific domestic motion, the tilt of the wrist, the way she seated the wood without spilling ash, that it caught Caleb off guard, the way specific things kept catching him off guard. Not the large revelations, but the small automatic ones. The things the body remembers when the mind is still finding its way back. The hearing is on Friday, he said. I know. Vale will have people there. I expect so. The Judge Holt's fair, Caleb said. He's not in Vale's pocket, but he'll need something solid. Not just memory, not just what we say. The doll, she said. Scar. The ledger, can I bring the ledger? The original one from the first year. If my handwriting is in it from before. Caleb looked at her. I kept the books that year, she said. You told me I had better handwriting. I can write something now, and they can compare it. Handwriting changes, but the fundamentals don't change completely. Doc Reeves or someone who knew me could look at it. He paused. That's a good idea. I was a schoolteacher's daughter, she said. I know how to build a case. She said it without pride, just as a fact. We're going to need more than the scar and the doll, Caleb. Vale will have an argument ready for each piece of evidence individually. We need enough pieces that the argument collapses under the weight of all of them together. He looked at her for a moment. The night before the wedding, he said. She turned to look at him. The night before the wedding, he repeated. I came to the window of the room where you were staying. The Harpers were keeping you there, the family that had the boarding house before the Millers took it over. He paused. I came to the window because I couldn't sleep and I was… He stopped. Afraid, she said. Yes. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. You told me you were afraid you wouldn't be enough, she said slowly. That you'd built something real out here, but you weren't sure it was the kind of thing a person could actually live inside. That you could run a ranch, but you weren't sure you knew how to… She stopped. To be a husband, he said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. I told you that was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me. You did, and then I told you to go to sleep. She almost smiled again. It was the same, almost not quite arriving, hovering at the edge. Because we both had a long day ahead of us, and being afraid in the dark was not going to resolve anything. That was practical of you, Caleb said. It was practical of me, she agreed. I was always better at practical than you were. That's accurate. She turned back to the stove. The new wood had caught, and the fire was building again, and the room was a degree other too warmer. We made a promise that night, she said. Not a wedding vow before the wedding. The window. You said we should promise each other the truth always, even if it was inconvenient, even if it was the kind of truth the other person didn't want to hear. She paused. I agreed. As she stopped and her brow furrowed slightly, I said that was the only kind of marriage I was willing to have. You did, Caleb said. His voice was very quiet. We'll tell them that, she said. At the hearing. That's not something anyone else could know. That's not something you would have told anyone not you. No, he said, I wouldn't have. She nodded. Then we go on Friday, she said, and we tell them the truth, and we give them enough of it that they can't say it's coincidence. She straightened in her chair. Vale is going to make this difficult. He is. He's going to try to make me look confused. Or manipulative. One or the other, probably both. Probably. I'm not confused, she said. Evenly, without heat. I was very confused for a long time. I'm not now. She looked at Caleb directly. I need you to hold to that when they try to make you doubt it. When they put pressure on, and they will put pressure on, I need you to hold. I held for 4 days before I had anything concrete to hold to, Caleb said. I think I can manage Friday. She looked at him for a moment. You did, didn't you, she said. It wasn't quite a question. Noah stopped in the street, he said. That was enough for me to start. She looked at her hands, folded in her lap. He was 4 when I left, she said. He was 4 years old. He couldn't remember a face or a name, but he remembered 12 notes of a song in the right order. She paused. That's I know, Caleb said. She nodded once, tightly, and said nothing else. They sat by the stove for another hour without talking much. The fire burned down and neither of them added more wood, and eventually the room cooled to the point where continuing to sit there required more commitment than it was worth. And they said good night in the hall at the bottom of the stairs simply, without ceremony, and went to their separate rooms. Caleb lay awake for a long time. In the room across the hall, he could hear, very faintly, the sound of her moving. Not restless, just present. The small sounds of a person occupying a space, settling in. The creak of the bed, the shift of weight. He had not heard that in 2 years. He had not realized how loud the silence of its absence had been, until this moment when it was gone. Wednesday brought old Clara Fitch. She was 73 years old and had been in Harlan Creek longer than almost anyone, which meant her social authority was considerable, and her opinion was not something people dismissed without consequence. She arrived at the ranch mid-morning in her wagon, driving herself, despite the fact that 2 of her grandsons had been telling her for 5 years she should let someone else handle the reins. Caleb met her at the yard. Don't look at me like you're surprised, she said, climbing down with the self-sufficiency of a woman who had survived 40 years of Montana winters and was not about to be helped by anyone who hadn't asked first. I heard what's happening, and I wanted to see for myself. She's inside, Caleb said. I know where she is. Show me. He brought Clara into the kitchen, where Amelia was at the table, writing the handwriting comparison she'd mentioned, working through a practice page to see how much her script had drifted from the samples in the old ledger. She looked up when Clara walked in. Clara stopped in the middle of the kitchen floor. She looked at Amelia for a long time. Amelia looked back, and there was something in her expression Not recognition exactly, but the alertness of a person trying to find the shape of a memory in a face. "Mrs. Fitch," she said. Clara's expression did not change, but something in her posture shifted. "What was the name of my dog?" Clara said. No preamble, no greeting. Amelia looked at her steadily. "You had two when I arrived," she said. "The brown one that followed you everywhere was Hazel. The other one was your grandson's dog, and I don't think it had a proper name. You called it the Nuisance." Clara turned to Caleb. "The dog was dead before you came back to Harlan Creek," she said to him. "You wouldn't have known about the dog." "I didn't tell her," Caleb said. Clara turned back to Amelia. "What did you bring me the first Christmas?" she said. Amelia's brow furrowed. She was working for it. This wasn't instant. This required excavation. "Preserves," she said slowly. "I made them myself." "Choke a cherry." "I'd been given a jar by one of the homestead wives, and I thought you would prefer something practical over something decorative." She paused. "You told me choke cherry preserves were your late husband's favorite." Clara was quiet for a moment. "I told that to maybe 3 people in the last 20 years, she said. "Caleb Whitmore is not one of them." She pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat down in it, heavily, the way old people sit when they've been standing longer than they planned. "Pour me some coffee," she said to no one in particular. "This is going to take a while." She stayed for 3 hours. Over those 3 hours, she asked Amelia approximately 40 questions, some of them obvious tests, some of them things Caleb himself had not remembered until Amelia answered them. Some of them details so specific that Clara sat back in her chair afterward with an expression that was not quite satisfaction and not quite grief, but something that moved between the two. She asked about the church social in the summer of Amelia's first year. She asked about the argument between the Halverson family and the Dobbs family over the water rights to Miller Creek, and the specific role Amelia had played in mediating it. She asked about the dress Amelia had worn to the county commissioner's dinner, and what she'd done when the hem tore on the way in, and who had helped her fix it in the cloakroom. Amelia got some things slightly wrong the year of the water rights dispute, the color of a ribbon. Memory is not a transcript. It is a reconstruction, and reconstructions have errors. Clara noted each error and asked about it, and Amelia didn't argue, just acknowledged the gap and moved on. But she got enough right that by the end of the 3 hours, Clara Fitch was sitting at the kitchen table with an expression that Caleb had never seen on her before. The expression of a woman who has been surprised by the world after 7 decades of assuming it had run out of surprises. "The hearing is Friday," Caleb said. "I'll be there," Clara said. She did not frame it as an offer. She stood up and straightened her coat and looked at Amelia directly. "They're going to be difficult," she said. "Vale has money and Binns has words, and the two of those together make a particular kind of obstacle." "I know," Amelia said. "You'll need to be steady," Clara said. "Not performing steady. Actually steady. There's a difference, and people who've lived long enough can see it." "I'll try," Amelia said. "Don't try," Clara said. "Just be what you are. That's either going to be enough or it isn't." She put on her hat, exchanged a look with Caleb that contained 3 decades of mutual respect and various uncomfortable truths, and walked out to her wagon. Caleb watched her go. "She believes you," he said. "I know," Amelia said. She was looking at the door Clara had closed behind her. "She believed me from the first question. But she asked 40 of them anyway." "That's Clara Fitch." "It's right," Amelia said. "Belief isn't enough. Evidence is better. She was giving me evidence." She paused. "She'll be a good witness." Thursday came with bad weather and Marcus Vale. The weather arrived first, a cold morning rain that turned the ranch roads to mud and kept everyone inside or under cover. Vale arrived at 11 o'clock with Binns and Garrett again, but this time he had brought a 4th man, a physician from the county seat named Dr. Harold Mace, who had a narrow face and a careful manner, and who Vale introduced as a specialist in cases of mental disturbance and identity confusion. The introduction was delivered pleasantly, without any apparent awareness of how insulting it was. That was one of Vale's skills. Caleb received them on the porch. He did not invite them in. "We'd like to speak with the woman," Vale said, informally, "before tomorrow." Dr. Mace would like the opportunity to conduct a brief assessment purely to help clarify the situation for the court. "No," Caleb said. Vale's expression did not change. "Caleb, this is in everyone's interest. If the woman is genuinely confused about her identity, Doctor, Mace can help provide—" "She's not confused," Caleb said. "You can't know that," Vale said. "That's precisely the point. Person who has suffered significant trauma who may have been living in isolation, under duress, for an extended period may sincerely believe things that are not accurate. It's not a failing, it's a medical reality. Dr. Mace can determine Dr. Mace is not going to determine anything on my property, Caleb said. Tomorrow, before Judge Holt, she will answer questions. Not today. Not informally. Not with your doctor and your lawyer in attendance to manage what gets recorded. Vale's eyes had gone flat, the way they went when he was calculating rather than persuading. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Vale said. I'm making it exactly as hard as it needs to be, Caleb said. You want her to be confused or compliant or both, and you want it established before she walks into that courtroom tomorrow. I'm not going to help you with that. A silence stretched between them. The rain came down steadily. She's not Amelia, Vale said. Quietly, directly, the persuasion stripped out of it. I don't know who she is, but she is not your wife. Amelia Whitmore died in that storm. You know that. You've known it for 2 years. This woman is using your grief and your son's grief, and when you figure that out, the damage will already be done. Caleb looked at him for a long moment. Marcus, he said, if she's not Amelia, then I helped a woman who needed help. That's not damage. That's just what you do. Picked up his hat from the post beside the door. If she is Amelia, then you're the one doing damage, and I suspect you already know that. He put on his hat. Get off my land. Vale looked at him a moment longer, then turned and walked back to his wagon without another word. Binns and Garrett followed. Dr. Mace went last, with the expression of a man who has been brought to a situation and is just now fully understanding what the situation is. Caleb watched them go. Behind him, he heard the front door open. Amelia was standing in the doorway. She had heard. Porch was not large, and she had not been far away. She looked at the retreating wagon, then at Caleb. He's not going to stop after Friday, she said. No, Caleb said. He's not. What does he actually want? The eastern grazing rights? The rights, and probably a portion of the timberland along the North Ridge. With the estate in legal confusion with you, either dead or legally incompetent, the ranch becomes something he can work around. Without that confusion, he can't touch it. She looked at the rain. What if we lose tomorrow, she said. We won't. What if we do? He thought about it honestly, which she deserved. Then we appeal, he said, and we keep building the case. And we don't stop. He paused. I didn't look for you for 4 days and give up because the weather was bad. I'm not going to stop because a judge has a difficult morning. She looked at him. You looked for 4 days, she said. Every hour of daylight. She looked back at the rain. Something had settled in her jaw, the resolve she had been building all week, piece by piece, testing its weight. Then we go tomorrow, she said, and we give them everything we have. And if it's not enough the first time, we come back. She paused. Came back from 2 years in a mountain cabin. I can manage a county courtroom. You can, Caleb said. She went back inside without ceremony, the way she did most things directly, without announcing it. The rain kept falling. The ranch absorbed it the way the ranch absorbed everything, steadily, without complaint, waiting for what came next. Wyatt appeared from the direction of the barn, mud on his boots, hat pulled low. They gone, he said. Caleb confirmed. Tomorrow's going to be something, Wyatt said. It is. Wyatt looked at the house, at the closed door behind which Amelia had disappeared. She's steadier than most people would be, he said. In that position. She is, Caleb said. She remind you of Amelia? Caleb was quiet for a moment. She doesn't remind me of Amelia, he said. She is Amelia. 2 years older and harder in a dozen places she shouldn't be, but the same person. He looked at the mud of the yard, at the tire tracks Vale's wagon had left. She fixed the feed ledger. You mentioned that. $40, Caleb said. $40, Wyatt agreed. It was not the most eloquent declaration of certainty either of them had ever heard. But it was the kind of certainty that held weight, the kind built from small specific things stacked one on top of another until the structure was too solid to push over. Friday was coming. Vale would be there, and Binns with his careful words and doctor. Mace with his narrow face and his professional opinions, and the judge who was fair but needed something to point to. And Amelia Whitmore, who had survived a storm and 2 years in a mountain cabin, and the particular cruelty of a man who told her she didn't exist, was going to walk into that courtroom and stand up under every question they could find, because the alternative was letting Silas Crow's version of her life be the permanent one. That was not something she was willing to do. Caleb had known that from the moment she stood in the middle of the street and let herself be taken home. She had not come all this way to be erased again. The Friday morning of the hearing arrived cold and clear, the kind of October day that looked almost reasonable from the inside of a warm room, and then hit you like a wall of ice the moment you stepped outside. Caleb was up before dawn. He heard Amelia moving in the room across the hall an hour after that, Not restless, not pacing, just the sound of a person getting ready with deliberate attention. When she came downstairs at 6:30, she was wearing the dress Dora had let out and mended for her from Amelia's old things, a dark wool with buttons down the front. Plain, well-made, kind of dress that communicated nothing, except that the person wearing it was not trying to impress anyone with decorative intentions. Her hair was pinned back the way Caleb remembered, the way she'd worn it for their wedding. He didn't say that. Dora had put breakfast on the table. Nobody ate much. Noah came down at 7 and looked between the two of them and said, "Can I come?" "No," Caleb said. "I was the one who recognized her," Noah said. The argument was logical and clearly rehearsed. "I know. You're staying with Dora." Noah looked at Amelia. She crouched down so she was level with him, a specific adjustment. Deliberate, the kind of thing you do with a child you have experience with, and said, "Your father's right. But what you did is what made all of this possible. You're the reason we're going today." Noah received this seriously, the way he received most things. "Will it work?" he said. "I think so," she said. "I'm going to tell the truth. That usually works if you tell enough of it. What if they don't believe you?" "Then we come back tomorrow," she said, "and tell more of it." Noah looked at her for a moment, then nodded in the way that meant he had decided to accept this and would hold her to it. They left at 7:30. Wyatt drove. Caleb sat in the back of the wagon with Amelia, and the box with the ledger and the doll and the handwriting comparison pages, and a copy of the marriage record Caleb had located in the bottom of his desk drawer the previous evening sat between their feet, tied shut with a leather cord. They didn't talk much on the ride-in. The road was frozen in places where the puddles from Thursday's rain had hardened overnight, and the wagon moved carefully through the ruts. The mountains to the north were purple in the early light, and Amelia looked at them for a long time, without saying what she was thinking. Caleb thought he knew anyway. Somewhere north in those mountains was a cabin. Somewhere in those mountains was the remaining evidence of 2 years of her life that she was still excavating, piece by piece, in the small hours when she thought the house was asleep. He had heard her some nights. Not crying, she didn't cry, or she didn't let herself cry where it could be heard. Just awake, the particular stillness of someone sitting with something they can't put down yet. He had not knocked on the door. He didn't know if that was right. He suspected there was no right answer. County Courthouse in Harlan Creek was a 2-story building with a wooden facade that made ambitious claims about the permanence of civic order. The hearing room on the ground floor held approximately 60 people comfortably, and more than that when the occasion warranted. By 8:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before the proceeding was scheduled to begin, it held 73. Caleb counted from habit. Ranchers count things. Vale was already there in the front row on the right side, with Binns beside him and 2 other men Caleb recognized as members of the County Land Commission. Dr. Mace sat 1 row back. They had arrived early, which meant they had wanted to be seen arriving early, which was its own kind of message. Clara Fitch was in the 2nd row on the left, wearing her good coat and an expression that discouraged conversation. She had brought 2 women with her, Martha Halverson, who was in her 60s and had been one of the original witnesses at Caleb and Amelia's wedding, and a younger woman named Susan Greer, who had worked alongside Amelia at the church social committee during Amelia's first year in Harlan Creek. Doc Reeves was there. He was 70 years old and still practicing, still with cold hands, presumably, and he had brought his record book. Caleb had not asked Reeves to come. Reeves had simply appeared. He caught Caleb's eye when they came in and gave a short nod that was not warm exactly, but was unambiguous. Amelia saw him and looked at Caleb. "He has the record of the stitching," Caleb said quietly. "I didn't ask him," she said. "Neither did I." She looked at Reeves again, at the old man with his record book and his unreadable expression, and something in her face went through a small private adjustment. "All right," she said. "All right." They sat at the table on the left side, across the aisle from Vale's contingent. Binns had arranged papers in front of him, with the organized deliberateness of a man who wanted the other side to seize how many papers there were. Caleb put the leather-tied box on the table in front of him and did not look at the papers. Judge Alderman Holt came in at 9 o'clock exactly. He was 62, white-haired, and had been on the county bench for 18 years. Caleb had appeared before him twice on property matters, and had found him to be exactly what he'd described to Amelia: fair, thorough, and not particularly interested in being managed by anyone. He looked at the room with the expression of a man who had presided over enough of these proceedings to know when one was going to be more complicated than the filing suggested. He settled himself, organized his own papers, and looked up. "We are here today," he said, without preamble, "to address the question of the identity and legal status of a woman currently residing at the Whitmore Ranch, brought before this court by petition of concerned parties, who question whether her residence is voluntary and whether her claimed identity is credible." He looked across both tables. "I want to be clear about the scope of this proceeding. We are not here to adjudicate property rights, inheritance, or any matter of estate. We are here for one question only. Is the woman at this table Amelia Carter Whitmore, wife of Caleb Whitmore, reported missing October 1885? I will hear evidence and testimony on that question, and on that question only. Are we understood?" Binns began to say something, Mr. Binns, Holt said, without looking at him. "I'll take that as a yes." Binns went first, because Vale had petitioned, and petitioners went first. He was a capable lawyer in the way that lawyers who serve wealthy clients become capable, smooth, organized, relentlessly reasonable in tone. He presented the case for skepticism methodically and without apparent malice. A woman with no documentation, no family to corroborate her account, no institutional record of her survival after the storm of October 1885. He noted the 2-year gap between the storm and the woman's appearance in Harlan Creek with what he called no satisfactory explanation for the interval. He described the potential for exploitation of a grieving family and a well-established ranch operation, and he did so in the measured cadence of a man who was simply following the evidence, not making accusations. Called Dr. Mace. Dr. Mace testified about identity confusion in trauma survivors with the academic detachment of a man describing something he had read about more than observed. He used terms that were designed to sound authoritative, and probably were, in a county seat lecture hall. Here, in a frontier courtroom with 73 people in it, and the wood stove going, and a 9-year-old boy's recognition at the center of the question, they sounded like what they were: a prepared argument dressed in medical language. Holt listened without expression. Then he looked at Caleb's side of the room. "Mr. Whitmore," he said. "Your witness," Caleb stood. He was not a natural speaker in formal settings. He was better one-on-one, better with his hands than with prepared sentences, but he had thought carefully about what he was going to say, and he said it plainly. He described the lullaby. He described Noah stopping in the middle of the street. He described the details Amelia had known, the rose wallpaper, the horse named Ector, the wedding night conversation at the window, and he delivered each one with the flat precision of a man recounting inventory, which was the only way he knew to keep his voice from doing something unhelpful. Binns cross-examined him with the focused energy of a man looking for a crack. "Mr. Whitmore, is it possible that details about your home and family, including your late wife's personal habits and preferences, could have become known to this woman through sources other than direct experience?" "What sources?" Caleb said. "Conversations with former employees of the ranch. Acquaintances of your wife. The kind of information a determined person could gather over time." "The lullaby wasn't in any conversation," Caleb said. "It wasn't written down anywhere. Nobody outside that house knew what it sounded like." "You can't be certain of that." "I am certain of that," Caleb said, "because my wife made it up. She didn't get it from somewhere. She made it up in the first weeks after Noah was born. There's nothing to overhear, because it was never said out loud to anyone except Noah. And you believe a 9-year-old child's recognition of a melody constitutes reliable identification." "I believe," Caleb said, "that a child who has never met his mother knows her voice in a way that doesn't require explanation. And I believe the 40 other things she knew corroborate what the melody started." Binns moved on. He called 2 witnesses of his own, a man from the Land Commission who testified about the unusual circumstance of a property dispute potentially affected by the hearing's outcome, and a woman named Mrs. Foster who had known Amelia socially and who testified, with evident discomfort, that the woman at the table looked different enough from her memory of Amelia that she could not personally make a positive identification. Mrs. Foster did not look at Vale when she said it, but she also didn't look at Amelia. Amelia looked at her steadily and said nothing. Then it was Clara Fitch. Clara walked to the front of the room with the unhurried authority of a woman who had been the oldest and most stubborn person in any given room for the past 15 years, and had made her peace with that fact. She sat down, arranged her coat, and looked at Judge Holt with the expression of someone who has been waiting to say something. She told the story of the 40 questions. She told it specifically: the dog's name, the preserves, the details of the church social. The argument about the water rights and Amelia's role in resolving it. She delivered it without drama, which was more effective than drama would have been. It was the testimony of a woman who had done her own investigation before arriving and was reporting results. In your assessment, Holt said, when she finished, is this woman Amelia Carter Whitmore? In my assessment, Clara said, there is no other reasonable explanation for what she knows. Binns cross-examined her with somewhat more caution than he'd brought to Caleb. Mrs. Fitch, you acknowledge that memory is imperfect and that the woman made errors in some of her recollections. She got the year of the Halverson water dispute wrong by 1 year, Clara said. I've gotten it wrong myself. That's not the kind of error an imposter makes. An imposter gets the big things wrong and the small things right because she's rehearsed the small things. Amelia got all the big things right and one small date slightly off. That's how a real person's memory works. Binns paused fractionally. It was a good answer and he knew it. Nothing further, he said. Doc Reeves was brief and effective in the way old men who have spent decades not wasting words become briefly effective. He opened his record book to the entry from March 1884. He described the wound a laceration to the left forearm, 4 inches in length, caused by a nail-pulled fence rail, and he described the stitching procedure and the specific scar tissue formation he would expect to follow from the repair he'd made. He noted that the formation was unusual because the wound had been deeper on one end than the other, creating a scar that tapered rather than remaining uniform, which was a detail not observable from the outside without knowing what to look for. He was then asked to examine the woman's arm. He did so. He looked at the scar for 30 seconds, turned the arm slightly, looked again. Is this consistent with the scar you would expect from the wound you treated in March 1884? Holt asked. It's not consistent with it, Reeves said. It is it. Taper, the depth differential at the proximal end. The direction of the healed tissue, this is the scar I made. He closed his record book. I've been stitching people up for 40 years. I know my own work. Vale in the front row was very still. Binns conferred with him in a rapid murmur, then stood. Reeves, you acknowledge that similar injuries could produce similar scars. Similar, Reeves said. Not identical. The specific characteristics of this scar correspond to the specific characteristics of the wound I documented. Probability of an identical scar from an unrelated injury is not 0, but it is small enough that I would not stake my professional reputation on it as an alternative explanation. He paused, which I am being asked to do and I am declining to do. He went back to his seat. Martha Halverson testified that she had been a witness at the Whitmore wedding, and that she recognized the woman at the table as the woman she had witnessed taking her vows. She acknowledged that 7 years had passed, and that the woman's appearance had changed. She was calm about this acknowledgement. People change, she said. I still recognize her. Susan Greer testified about a specific incident at the church social, a disagreement about the decoration committee's budget that had resulted in a compromise Amelia had proposed, the details of which she described with enough specificity that 2 people in the room who had been there nodded without seeming to realize they were doing it. Then Holt looked at Amelia. I'll hear from the woman herself, he said. She walked to the front of the room without hurrying. Caleb watched her do it, and he thought not for the first time, but more clearly than before, that she had a particular quality that he had not fully understood when they were first married, when it had simply seemed like steadiness or practicality, or the composure of a woman who had decided not to show certain things in public. He understood it better now. It was not the absence of fear. It was the decision to keep moving despite it, so consistently practiced that it had become indistinguishable from the real thing. She sat down. She folded her hands on the table in front of her. She looked at Judge Holt and waited. Holt asked her to state her name. Amelia Carter Whitmore, she said. I was born Amelia Catherine Carter in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, on the 14th of March, 1856. I came to Montana Territory in April of 1880 in response to a matrimonial correspondence with Caleb James Whitmore. We were married on the 22nd of April, 1880 in this county, with Martha Halverson and a man named George Purdy as witnesses. George Purdy is no longer in the county he moved on, in 1882, I believe. Martha Halverson is in this room. She paused. I am aware that I look different from the woman people remember, she said. I am aware that 7 years is a long time, and that my absence has been used by some people to arrange circumstances that my return complicates. I am not going to pretend otherwise, because I was asked to tell the truth, and I intend to. She looked at Vale when she said the last part, not with hostility, with the directness of a person delivering a fact. Vale met her eyes. Something moved in his expression that Caleb could not read from across the room. Holt said, "Tell me what happened on the night of October 14th, 1885. She told it. She told it the way she'd pieced it together over the past week, from the fragments and the recovering memories and the things that had come back while she was pulling weeds or fixing the ledger or lying awake in the rose wallpapered room. She didn't tell it in perfect order because it hadn't happened to her in perfect order. She said so. At the start, I'm going to tell you what I remember, in the order I remember it, and there are gaps." And Holt nodded once to indicate he understood. Storm. The overturning wagon. The cold that was beyond cold, the kind that happens so fast the body doesn't have a vocabulary for it. Crawling. Not knowing which direction was right. A ledge of rock that broke the wind enough that she could think for a few minutes. Then nothing along nothing. The kind that isn't sleep but isn't consciousness either. The kind the body goes into when it is trying to preserve what's left. Then Silas Crow. She described finding herself in the cabin. She described the confusion, the total, genuine confusion of a person with no accessible past, no name she could hold on to, nothing to anchor herself to except the present moment and the hands of the man who said he'd found her. She described how Crow had explained her condition to her, that she'd been out in the cold too long, that she'd lost things she wasn't going to get back, that the person she'd been before was gone, and she should be practical about it and grateful she was alive. "Did you believe him?" Holt said. "At first," she said. "He was the only source I had. I had nothing to check him against." She paused. "But something was always off. There was always a sense of somewhere else, not a place I could name or a person I could describe, just elsewhere. A child, a room with a particular smell, the knowledge that I had somewhere to be, even when I couldn't remember where." "When did you begin to recover your memory?" "Gradually," she said. "Over the second year more than the first. Pieces came back, not in order, not as a story, as parts of things. The more I recovered, the more I understood that what Crow had told me was not accurate. And the more I understood that, the more dangerous my situation became." She was quiet for a moment. "He didn't want me to remember. He was aware when things were coming back, and he found ways to interrupt it. Keep me focused on the immediate present, on work, on what needed doing today. And yet you left." "I didn't leave easily," she said. "I left because I reached a point where I understood that if I didn't go, I never would. That whatever was left of who I was would be used up entirely." She looked at her hands. "I walked south for 3 days before I reached anything that looked like a town. I ate what I could find. It was cold." She paused. "I ended up in Harlan Creek because I was going south, and this was south, and I was out of strength by the time I got here." Holt looked at her steadily. "Is there anything," he said, "that only you and Caleb Whitmore would know?" She had known this question was coming. She had thought about the answer carefully, not because she needed to manufacture something, but because she needed to choose the right thing from everything available, the thing that was most specific and least arguable. "The night before our wedding," she said. "Caleb came to the window of the room where I was staying at the Harper boarding house. Came because he couldn't sleep. He told me he was afraid he wouldn't be a sufficient husband, that he knew how to build things but wasn't sure he knew how to sustain something that required more than work. More than competence." She paused. "He told me he had always been better at starting things than at seeing them through when they became difficult. He said he wanted to be honest about that before we made promises to each other." The room was quiet. "I told him to go to sleep," she said. "I told him that what he'd just done, coming to the window to say an uncomfortable thing, rather than letting me marry him without knowing it was proof that he was wrong about himself." She paused. "We made a promise that night, not the vows before the vows. We promised each other the truth, always, even when it was inconvenient, even when it hurt. He said that was the only promise he thought he could keep absolutely, and I said that was the only promise that mattered." She looked at Caleb. He was not composed. He was doing the thing he did, which was to hold himself very still so that the lack of composure didn't show, but she had been watching him for a week, and she knew the difference by now. That conversation happened at approximately 11 o'clock at night, she said. There was no one else present. I have never repeated it to anyone, and neither has Caleb, not because it was a secret, but because it was ours. Holt said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Mr. Binns, do you wish to cross-examine?" Binns stood. He had the posture of a man who was proceeding because professional obligation required it, not because he thought it was going to help. "You've described a remarkable recovery of memory," he said. "You acknowledge gaps. You acknowledge errors. How should this court weigh testimony that you yourself describe as incomplete?" "The same way you'd weigh any human testimony," she said, "with the understanding that complete certainty isn't available and that the question is whether the evidence taken together points clearly in one direction." She met his eyes. "The scar is not incomplete. The handwriting is not incomplete. The lullaby is not incomplete. The wedding night conversation is not incomplete. I've given you 12 things I could not know if I weren't who I say I am. You're asking me to apologize for the fact that I can't give you 12 more." Binns had no immediate response to that. "Nothing further," he said, and sat down. Holt called a recess of 20 minutes. Caleb sat at the table and did not speak to anyone. Wyatt brought him a cup of water from the pitcher at the back and set it down without comment. Clara Fitch moved through the room, speaking quietly to the people she knew, which was most of them. Amelia sat beside Caleb and did not speak either, but she put her hand flat on the table, and after a moment he put his hand next to hers, not touching, just close, and that was enough. Vale spoke to Binns during the recess in a rapid, low-voiced conversation that Caleb watched from across the room without being able to hear. He could read something of it from Vale's posture, from the way Binns's shoulders were set, from the way Dr. Mace, seated behind them, was looking at the floor with the expression of a man reconsidering several things. The recess ended. Holt returned. He settled himself with the organized stillness of a man who had made a decision, and was about to deliver it with the appropriate weight. "I have heard testimony from 8 witnesses today," he said, "in addition to the principals in this matter. I have reviewed documentary evidence, including medical records, financial ledger entries in the handwriting of Amelia Carter Whitmore compared to current samples, and the county marriage record of Caleb and Amelia Whitmore from April 1880. He paused. "Question before this court is not whether the events described are unusual. They are unusual. A woman surviving the October 1885 storm, living under circumstances she describes for 2 years before returning to Harlan Creek. All of that is unusual. But unusual is not impossible, and the weight of evidence presented today does not support a finding that this woman is an imposter." Vale made a small movement in his seat. Binns put a hand on his arm. "The scar is consistent with documented medical treatment of Amelia Carter Whitmore in March 1884, as attested by the physician who treated the wound. The handwriting samples show the consistency of a single individual's hand across a 7-year period, allowing for the changes that time and circumstance produce. The testimony of witnesses who knew Amelia Whitmore personally, concerning details that are not publicly available, is credible and consistent. And the account of a private conversation between the petitioner's principals is not corroborated by any external source, which is precisely what gives it weight. It is not something that could have been researched." He looked across both tables. "It is the ruling of this court that the woman currently residing at the Whitmore Ranch is Amelia Carter Whitmore, wife of Caleb James Whitmore, whose disappearance in October 1885 has been a matter of county record. She is not a missing person of unknown identity. She is not a ward of the county. She is a woman who survived extraordinary circumstances and has returned to her legal residence and her family." He looked at Binns. "Petition is denied. Are there questions about this ruling?" Binns said, with the precision of a man managing a tactical retreat, "No, Your Honor." Vale said nothing. Holt closed his folder. "Then we're done," he said, and stood. The room did not erupt in anything dramatic. It was too small a place and too complicated a situation for eruption. What happened was more like a gradual exhale, a collective release of the specific tension that had been building since 9 o'clock that morning, people shifting in their seats, turning to speak to the person next to them, the low sound of many simultaneous conversations beginning. Clara Fitch made her way to Amelia immediately and took her hand in both of hers, not an embrace. Clara was not an embrace person and held it for a moment in a grip that communicated something that didn't require naming. Martha Halverson was crying quietly, which she appeared to find embarrassing. Susan Greer was not crying, but was holding Martha's arm with the focused attention of a person managing someone else's emotion, so they don't have to manage their own. Doc Reeves appeared at Caleb's elbow. "She's going to need feeding up properly," he said, without preamble, without congratulations, in the same tone he used to discuss livestock medication. She's thin in a way that doesn't fix itself quickly. Iron, good protein, regular meals, not just when the work breaks for it. All right, Caleb said. I'm not asking, Reeves said. I'm telling you, I understand. Reeves looked at him for a moment. Something passed through his expression that was, from Reeves, the equivalent of a long emotional speech. Good, he said, and moved away. Across the room, Vale was standing. He had not approached Caleb or Amelia. He was at the edge of the crowd near the door, and he was watching the proceedings with an expression that Caleb had not seen on him before, not the calculating assessment he usually wore, not the managed pleasantry he deployed in public situations. Something beneath both of those. Caleb looked at him. Vale looked back. Then Vale put on his hat and walked out of the room. Binns followed, and then Garrett, and then Dr. Mace with the record bag he'd brought and not opened. Caleb watched them go. He's not finished, Amelia said beside him. No, Caleb said. The ruling doesn't change what he wants, she said. Just the method he'll use to try and get it. I know. So do we have a plan for what comes next? He looked at her. She was asking a practical question, the way she always asked practical questions, not as an expression of worry, but as the first step in addressing a situation. We go home, he said. We go home and we take care of what's there. And if Vale comes at it from another direction, we deal with that when it comes. Considered this. That's not much of a plan, she said. No, he said, but it's the right one for today. She looked at the door Vale had gone through, and then she looked at the box on the table, the ledger, the doll, the handwriting pages, and she reached forward and untied the leather cord and took out the cloth doll with the blue dress. It was worn and soft from years of handling. The blue of the dress faded to something closer to gray. The lavender smell was long gone. But it was intact, the seams held, the button eyes still in the right places. She held it for a moment without saying anything. Then she put it carefully back in the box, retied the cord, and picked it up. Let's go home, she said. Wyatt had the wagon ready. They rode back through the clear October morning, back along the frozen road with the mountains north and the ranch ahead, and Amelia sat beside Caleb and didn't hum anything, just rode in the particular quiet of a person who has completed something difficult and is not yet ready to replace the effort with noise. Noah was waiting at the gate. He had been told to stay inside, which had not worked, and was standing at the gate with his coat half-buttoned and his boots unlaced in the way of a child who has dressed quickly in response to hearing something he was not supposed to hear. He had clearly been watching the road. The wagon pulled in. He looked at Amelia. Did it work, he said. It worked, she said. He was quiet for a moment, processing this with the thoroughness he brought to most things. Then, he said, can I show you where the horses are? She climbed down from the wagon. Yes, she said. Show me. He took her hand, just took it, without asking, with the particular confidence of a child who had decided a thing and led her toward the barn. Caleb stood by the wagon and watched them go. The boy with his coat half-buttoned, the woman in the dark wool dress, the October light long and slanted across the yard. Wyatt appeared beside him. Hell of a week, Wyatt said. It is, Caleb agreed. Vale's going to come back at this, Wyatt said. Different angle, but he's going to come back. I know. You ready for that? Caleb watched Amelia and Noah disappear into the barn, the sound of Noah's voice carrying across the yard in the particular animated pitch of a child, showing something he loves to someone he's decided matters. She's home, Caleb said. The rest of it we deal with as it comes. Wyatt nodded once, slowly, the way he agreed to things that were not perfect solutions, but were the only solutions available, and were therefore the correct ones. The ranch went back to its work. The horses moved in the paddock. The wind came down from the north, from the mountains where Silas Crow's cabin still stood, and passed across the yard of the Whitmore Ranch, and went on south without stopping. But what it carried with it, what had been building in those mountains, since the moment Amelia had understood that she needed to go south and kept walking until she got there, was not finished traveling yet. It was going to come back around. And when it did, it would have Silas Crow's name on it. The letter from Silas Crow arrived on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after the hearing. It came with the regular mail, tucked between a seed catalog and an invoice from the timber supplier in Billings, which was either coincidence or a considered choice, something ordinary wrapped around something that was not ordinary at all. Dora brought the mail in with breakfast and set it on the table the way she always did, and Caleb sorted through it the way he always did, and then he stopped. The envelope had no return address. The handwriting was heavy and deliberate, the kind of handwriting that comes from a person who didn't learn it young and taught themselves later from necessity rather than education. His name was spelled correctly. The ranch's name was spelled correctly. That was already more than he'd expected from a man who lived in the mountains north of Harlan Creek and apparently believed that what he'd done to Amelia constituted a transaction rather than a crime. He opened it. The letter was 4 sentences long. It said that Silas Crow was aware that the woman called Ruth had returned to Harlan Creek and had been making claims about her identity. It said that Crow had invested considerable time and resources in this woman's care and survival, and that he expected fair compensation for that investment. It said that $500 delivered to a location he would specify would resolve the matter without further difficulty. The final sentence said that if the matter was not resolved in this way, he would come to resolve it himself. Caleb read it twice. Then he folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and put the envelope in his coat pocket. He finished his coffee. He ate most of his breakfast. He waited until Noah had gone outside to do his morning chores, and until Dora had moved to the back of the house before he went to find Amelia. She was in the front room, working on the account books. She had taken over the financial records completely in the past week and a half, not because anyone had asked her to, but because she had looked at the state of them and determined that there were 3 organizational problems that needed addressing before the end-of-year figures became permanent. She had the focused, slightly irritated expression of a person untangling something that should not have been tangled in the first place. He set the letter on the table in front of her without saying anything. She read it. Her expression did not change in any dramatic way. This was the thing about Amelia that he was relearning. She didn't show fear in her face. She showed it in other ways, in the way her hands went very still, in the way her breathing shifted slightly, in the way she looked at a point just past the object in front of her for a moment before returning to it. All 3 of those things happened now. Then she put the letter down. He waited 11 days, she said. He wanted to see the hearing went first, Caleb said. He was watching. $500, she said, without particular inflection. He underestimated the ranch, Caleb said. He thinks that's a serious amount for us. It's not about whether you can pay it, she said. He knows that if you pay it once, he'll come back for more. This isn't a transaction. This is the opening of something. She looked at the letter again. He's done this before. This the way he's written it. The way he's structured the threat. He's done it before. Caleb looked at her. What makes you say that? Because he's not afraid, she said. A man who does something like what he did to me, keeps a person against their will, takes their identity, uses them for 2 years, a man who has done that, and then writes a letter like this, is not a man who believes he's done anything indictable. He believes he found something, and that the person he found owes him. She paused. That's not a belief you arrive at the first time you do it. The room was quiet. Outside they could hear Noah's voice and the sound of the horses responding to their morning, feeding the particular conversational quality Noah had developed with animals, asking them questions and allowing for what he interpreted as answers. I'm not paying him, Caleb said. I know, and I'm not waiting for him to come here. She looked at him. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, he said carefully, that a man who is planning to come to my ranch and take my wife needs to be found before he gets here. Because here there's Noah. Here there's Dora. Here there's everything I'm not willing to put between Silas Crow and whatever he thinks he's owed. Amelia was quiet for a moment. I know where the cabin is, she said. I know you do. I can tell you how to get there. I can describe it well enough that you could find it without me. She paused. I'm not saying I should come. I'm saying I can give you what you need. I'll take Wyatt, he said, Caleb. I'll take Wyatt, he said again. You'll tell me everything you remember about the approach, the layout, the man's habits, and then you'll stay here. She looked at him with the expression she had when she was deciding whether to argue with something. He's dangerous, she said. He's not a gunfighter, he's not that kind. He's dangerous the way a trap is dangerous, patient. He sets things up and waits. He won't come at you straight. What will he do? He'll want to talk first, she said. He always wants to talk first. He thinks he can manage most things with words, and when he can't, he escalates quickly. There's not much middle ground with him. She paused. Don't let him talk for too long. All right. And he keeps a rifle above the door. Not on a rack, just resting in the brackets above the door frame. Easy to miss if you're not looking for it. Caleb noted that. What else, he said. She told him everything she could remember for the next 40 minutes, and he listened without interrupting, because she knew things that no amount of preparation on his part could substitute for. and she was telling them with the careful precision of a person who had spent 2 years learning a situation she had never wanted to know. He told Wyatt that afternoon. Wyatt listened with his arms crossed and his expression neutral, was Wyatt's version of paying close attention. "North," Wyatt said when Caleb finished. "How far north?" She said 3 days on horseback from where she walked out. She came south at walking pace, weak, not following any trails she knew. On horseback, taking the direct route. Caleb paused. "Probably 2 days. Maybe a day and a half if the weather holds." "Weather's not going to hold," Wyatt said, looking at the sky. "There's something coming from the northwest. 2-3 days. Then we leave tomorrow." Wyatt was quiet for a moment. "You going to talk to the sheriff?" After Caleb said, "If I talk to him before, he'll want to come along or send someone, and that changes everything. Crow sees a badge and the situation gets complicated in ways I can't predict. You're comfortable with the legal side of going up there without authority. I'm going to find a man who sent a threatening letter to my wife and invite him to answer for it," Caleb said. "I'll stand in front of whoever I need to stand in front of afterward." Wyatt looked at him for a moment. "All right," he said. "I'll get the horses ready." Caleb told Amelia that night. She did not argue, which surprised him slightly. She had the look of someone who had already argued with herself about it and reached a conclusion she wasn't entirely satisfied with. "You'll take the letter," she said. "Yes. And whatever documentation we can put together about what he did." She had been thinking about this while he was with Wyatt, evidently. "I've written an account what I remember about the cabin, the circumstances, how he managed the situation. It's not everything. Some of it's still not clear. But it's enough to establish the pattern." "When did you write that?" "This afternoon," she said. "While you were in the barn." She paused. "I've been meaning to write it for a while. This seemed like the right moment." He looked at her. "You were expecting this," he said. "I was expecting something," she said. "Men like Crow don't let things go. He's been comfortable for 2 years with a situation he controlled. Then the situation changed without his permission, and he has no framework for that." She folded the pages and handed them to him. "He's going to be angry. Underneath the letter, under all the business language, he's angry. Keep that in mind." He took the pages and added them to the envelope with the letter. "Noah doesn't know we're going," he said. "I'll tell him in the morning," she said, "after you've left. You could tell him it's a supply run." She looked at him with the expression that was not quite impatience. "No," she said. "I'll tell him the truth, at the level he can handle it. He's 9, he's not fragile." She paused. "He's had 2 years without a mother and he managed. He can handle a few days of honest uncertainty better than a lie that unravels." Caleb didn't argue with that. She was right, and he knew it, and he was not going to pretend otherwise, simply because the truth was harder. "I'll be back in 5 days," he said. "If I'm not back in 7, send word to the sheriff." "I'll send word in 6, she said. "Fine, Caleb." He looked at her. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Don't do anything to him that can't be undone. Whatever he deserves, and he deserves more than I'm going to say out loud, don't be the person who gives it to him outside the law. What he'd do. It's not what you do." He looked at her. "You think I'm going up there to kill him. I think you're going up there with a very specific kind of anger," she said. "And I think that's appropriate. I just want you to come back." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm coming back," he said. "I know you are," she said. "I'm reminding you to want to." They stood in the front room in the lamplight, and neither of them moved toward the other, because they were still, even now, even after everything, finding the shape of what they were to each other again. And it was not a thing that could be rushed without getting it wrong. "Good night," he said. "Good night," she said. He went upstairs and she stayed in the front room for a while longer, and the lamp burned until late. They left before dawn. The ride north took them out of the valley and into terrain that got progressively less traveled, first the established trails, then the rough paths used by trappers and occasional mining operations, then nothing that deserved to be called a path at all. Wyatt navigated by the landmarks Caleb relayed from Amelia's account, a particular rock formation that looked like a broken chimney, a creek crossing with 2 distinctive dead pines on the far bank, a rise from which the drainage pattern suggested a habitable hollow to the northeast. She had described it all with the accuracy of a person who had walked that ground in both directions under very different circumstances. They made good time the first day. The weather Wyatt had predicted was building to the northwest, a heavy gray presence on the horizon, but it held off. They camped in a protected hollow, ate cold food, and didn't build a fire large enough to be visible from any distance. Wyatt took first watch. Caleb lay on his bedroll and looked at the stars through the bare branches and thought about what he was going to say to Silas Crow. He had not fully decided. There were versions in his head that satisfied different parts of him. The version where he said nothing at all and let the law do the talking. The version where he said exactly what 2 years without Amelia had cost him and let Crow understand precisely the scale of the debt. Neither version felt complete, because he wasn't sure what complete looked like in a situation like this, a situation where the damage was already done and could not be undone, where the question was only what form the accounting would take. He fell asleep thinking about it and didn't dream. The second day was harder. Terrain climbed and the horses had to work, and by midday the clouds from the northwest had arrived and were delivering a cold, steady wind that cut through everything and made conversation an effort not worth attempting. They rode in silence, which suited both of them. At mid-afternoon of the second day, Caleb recognized the broken chimney rock. Pulled up. Wyatt came alongside close, Caleb said. Wyatt checked his rifle, without making a production of it. They went on. Slower now. Placing the horse's hooves carefully, keeping to the ground cover where it existed. The hollow that Amelia had described opened up ahead of them a natural depression, sheltered by a ridge to the north, a stand of lodgepole pines on the eastern edge, and in the center of it, a cabin. It was smaller than Caleb had imagined. He didn't know why he'd imagined it larger. Maybe because the amount of harm that had come out of it seemed too large for a structure this size raw timber, a mud-chinked roof. One window, a door that had been repaired badly with different colored planks, a woodpile along the south wall, a lean-to for the horses, one horse currently in it, a roan with a white blaze. Smoke from the chimney, Crow was home. Caleb looked at Wyatt. Wyatt had positioned himself to the right, slightly behind, at the angle that covered the window. He nodded once. Caleb dismounted and walked toward the door. He did not knock. He'd thought about this on the ride and decided that knocking was a courtesy he wasn't prepared to offer. He lifted the latch and opened the door and walked in. Silas Crow was at the table. He was a bigger man than Caleb had expected, not tall but wide across the shoulders, with the density of a man who had spent his life doing hard physical work in cold conditions. He was perhaps 55, with a short gray-brown beard and the deep-weathered skin of someone who spent most of their time outside. He had a tin cup in front of him and a hunting knife on the table beside it, and he was looking at Caleb with the expression of a man who is practiced enough at concealing it. It seems that only the speed of his stillness gives it away. His eyes moved to the door behind Caleb, assessing. "Just me," Caleb said, which was not true but was the appropriate first move. "You're Silas Crow." "Who's asking?" Crow said. Not a question, a territorial statement. "My name is Caleb Whitmore," Caleb said. "I run the Whitmore Ranch south of Harlan Creek. You sent me his letter." Something shifted in Crow's expression. The surprise calibrated. He hadn't known what Whitmore would look like, and now he was making the adjustments that came with knowing. "Sit down," Crow said, nodding toward the chair across the table. "I'll stand," Caleb said. Crow looked at him for a moment, then leaned back in his chair with the deliberate ease of a man reminding both of them that this was his space. "You got my terms," Crow said. "I got your letter," Caleb said. "I didn't read anything in it that resembled terms. I read a threat. Call it what you want," Crow said. "The amount's the same." "I'm not paying you," Caleb said. Crow picked up his tin cup, looked into it, set it back down. "Then we've got a problem." "We've got a problem," Caleb agreed. "But it's not the one you think." Crow looked at him with the flat attention of a man deciding how much trouble something is going to be. "I kept her alive," Crow said. "She was half dead when I found her. Frostbitten, not conscious, out in the open in the worst storm this county's had in 10 years. I brought her in, I fed her. I gave her 2 years of shelter and work. That has value." "You took her name," Caleb said. "She didn't have one," Crow said. "She didn't know who she was." "You knew she'd had one before," Caleb said. "You knew she'd come from somewhere. You made a choice about that." Crow's expression didn't change. She was useful where she was. The words landed with the flatness they deserved, and Caleb stood with them for a moment without letting himself react to them the way he wanted to react to them. "Court in Harlan Creek has ruled that the woman you're describing is my wife," Caleb said. "Amelia Carter Whitmore. A judge reviewed the evidence and found her identity established. What you did to her has a name under the law. Courts down there don't reach up here," Crow said. "That's what you believe," Caleb said. "You're wrong about it." Crow looked at him with the patience of a man who has managed difficult conversations before by simply outlasting them. "You came a long way," Crow said, "to tell me you're not paying and to inform me about a court decision. That's not all you came for. No, Caleb said, it's not. So say the rest of it. Caleb reached into his coat and put the envelope on the table. Not within Crow's reach, just on the table, visible. That's your letter, he said. The one you sent. There's also a written account from my wife describing the circumstances of her time here, in her own words, and as specifically as she remembers them. The two of those together are what I'm going to give to the county sheriff when I get back to Harlan Creek. Crow looked at the envelope without touching it. There's also the matter, Caleb said, of what I believe the law calls unlawful detention, keeping a person who is not there by choice, using her labor without wages or consent, constructing a false identity to prevent her from exercising her own freedom. He paused. That's not a civil matter. That's criminal. The cabin was very quiet. The fire in the stove popped once. She was confused, Crow said. Flatly, but there was something different in the flatness now. She didn't know who she was. I gave her a stable situation. You gave her a prison with better weather than the outside, Caleb said. And when she started remembering, you worked to stop it. She told us that. She wrote it down. He looked at Crow steadily. You're not going to convince anyone that what happened here was kindness. Not a judge, not a jury, not anyone in Harlan Creek who sat in that courtroom and heard what she said. Crow's hand moved toward the knife on the table. It was a small movement, casual, the way a man's hand moves toward something familiar, without necessarily intending anything yet. Caleb did not move. He said, the man at the window has a rifle. He's been watching since, before I walked in. Whatever you're thinking about the knife, you should think about that first. Crow's hand stopped. A long silence. Then Crow said, what do you want, Whitmore? I want you to stand up, Caleb said. I want you to come back to Harlan Creek, and I want you to stand in front of the same judge my wife stood in front of and answer for what you did. He paused. That's the option I'm offering you. The only one. Crow looked at him, and if I don't, Crow said, then I leave. Caleb said, and I go to the sheriff, and I give him the letter and the account, and I describe exactly where this cabin is and how to find it, and the people who come back won't be offering options. He held Crow's eyes. You sent that letter because you thought you could manage this situation the way you've managed things before. You can't. The difference now is that she remembers everything. She's written it down, and she stood in front of a courtroom and said it out loud. It's not a situation you can threaten your way around. Crow sat with that for a moment. He was calculating. Caleb could see it, the slow, deliberate calculation of a man assessing exits. The weight of what was actually in front of him, against what he'd assumed he was dealing with. She told you about the rifle above the door, Crow said. Told me everything, Caleb said. That was the first thing she understood when she got her memory back, that everything she knew about this place, about you, about how you operate, was information she could use. She used it. Crow looked at the table. Something went through his expression that was not quite the same as the thing that had been there before a rearrangement, as though the pieces of something had shifted and the new configuration was less comfortable than the old one. She was always smarter than she let on, Crow said. And it was said not with admiration, but with the flat acknowledgement of a man recognizing the mechanism by which he had been beaten. Yes, Caleb said, she was. Crow came. Not willingly. Not with any particular grace, he moved through the process of being brought in with the sullen compliance of a man who has run the numbers and found them unfavorable. He said almost nothing on the 2-day ride back. He ate what they gave him and slept when they camped and did not attempt to run, which Caleb had half expected and been prepared for. Wyatt rode with the roan's lead in one hand for most of the return journey, which was unnecessary. Crow wasn't going anywhere but felt like the appropriate arrangement. On the first evening of the return, camped at the same protected hollow where they'd stopped on the way north, Crow said something unexpected. He said it to the fire, not to either of them. I did find her, he said. That part was true. She was on the ground, and she wasn't going to be on the ground much longer. Caleb didn't respond immediately. He was thinking about what Amelia had said, don't do anything that can't be undone. Then you had a choice, Caleb said. I made one, Crow said. You made the wrong one, Caleb said. And you kept making it for 2 years. Saving a life doesn't give you ownership of it. Crow said nothing to that. They rode into Harlan Creek on a Thursday afternoon, 5 days after they'd left. The sheriff, a man named Aldous Briggs, who had 20 years of experience, and the practiced calm of someone who had encountered most of what the frontier could produce, met them at the edge of town. He had been waiting. Amelia had sent word to him on the 6th day, as she'd said she would, and Briggs had ridden out to meet them. He took the envelope. He read the letter and the account. He looked at Crow with the expression of a man cataloging a problem. "Silas Crow," he said, not as a greeting. Crow said nothing. "I've heard about you," Briggs said. "This isn't the first county you've been a difficulty in." He handed the envelope back to Caleb. "I'll keep him while we assemble the charges. There'll be a formal proceeding." "There's enough for that?" Caleb said. "Unlawful detention at minimum," Briggs said. "If her account holds up, and I expect it will, probably more." He looked at Caleb with the direct assessment of a man who notices things. "You brought him in without an incident." "There wasn't an incident," Caleb said. Briggs looked at him a moment longer. "Go home, Whitmore," he said. "You look like you've been riding for 5 days." "I have been," Caleb said. He left Crow with the sheriff and rode to the ranch. Amelia was in the yard when he came in. She had heard the horse on the road. She had sharp hearing, which he was relearning, along with everything else, and had come out before he reached the gate. She was wearing the work coat she'd appropriated from the barn peg, the one that had been his, and was 3 sizes too large, and her hair was coming out of its pins from a day of outdoor work. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Crow," she said. "With the sheriff," he said. "Briggs has the letter and your account. There'll be a formal proceeding." She let out a breath. Not a dramatic exhale, a small, controlled release, the kind that has been held for a specific duration and is now allowed out in a measured way. "Are you hurt?" she said. "No," he said. "Wyatt, fine." He went to his house. She nodded. She looked at him for another moment with the assessing quality she brought to most things, checking for what he wasn't saying. "You didn't do anything that can't be undone," she said. "Not a question." "No," he said. "Good," she said simply. He dismounted, and she took the horse's bridle, just took it, without asking, the way she took things that needed doing, and walked the horse toward the barn. He fell into step beside her. "Noah's asleep," she said. "He stayed up as late as I let him. He wanted to be awake. I'll see him in the morning." "He has questions," she said. "Crow, about where you went and what happened." "I'll answer them," Caleb said. "As much of the truth as he can handle," she said. "As much as he can handle," he agreed. They reached the barn. She took the horse in and began removing the saddle, and he took the bridle and hung it on the appropriate hook and began checking the horse's feet. And they worked in the comfortable parallel of 2 people who know each other's rhythm, the way they had learned it in the first years of the ranch, when neither of them was sure yet how much they trusted the other, and the work itself was what built the trust. "Clara Fitch came by," Amelia said. "Yesterday. What did she want?" "To see how I was managing," Amelia said, "and to tell me that 3 of the people who testified for Vale at the hearing have sent word to her expressing what she described as appropriate regret." She was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Foster sent a note directly to me." "What did it say?" "It said she was sorry," Amelia said, "that she'd been influenced by circumstances. She understood now to have been manipulated." She paused. "I wrote back and told her it was fine." "Is it fine?" Caleb said. Amelia thought about this honestly. "Not entirely," she said, "but it's over." And she was scared of Vale, and scared is something I understand better than I used to. She finished with the saddle and set it on the rack. "Some's you get through and some things you get over, and they're not always the same category." Caleb looked at her across the back of the horse. "He said something," Caleb said. "Crow, on the ride back. He said you were always smarter than you let on." She was quiet for a moment. "I let on exactly as much as was safe," she said, which was not much. She met his eyes. "I had to know what the margins were before I used them." 2 years of knowing the margins," he said. "Yes." He thought about what that required, not just intelligence, but discipline. The long, sustained effort of a person managing a situation they couldn't escape by force and couldn't survive without strategy. 2 years of staying small enough to be underestimated while collecting everything that might eventually be useful. "The account you wrote," he said. Briggs said it was enough. "What you put in it." "I wrote everything I could remember," she said. "I'd been meaning to write it for a while. I needed to put it somewhere outside my head. And now," she considered. "Now it's in a legal record," she said, "which is a better place for it than where it was." She finished in the barn, and they walked back to the house together in the dark. And the October night was cold and clear, and the stars were out in the particular abundance they achieved at this elevation. When the weather cooperated, which it did not always do. The back door she stopped. "Caleb," she said. He stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for going up there. For not," she paused, "for doing it the right way." He looked at her. There were things in his throat that were not sentences, that had no particular vocabulary, that had been accumulating for 2 years, and then for the past 5 days specifically, and he was not a man who was practiced at releasing them on purpose. You told me the only promise that mattered was the truth, he said. I was just holding to that. She looked at him for a moment in the lamplight from the kitchen window. Then she said, "Come inside. You need to eat something." He followed her in. The kitchen was warm from the stove, and there was food on the table, because she had known approximately when he'd be back and had planned accordingly. And Noah's coat was on the hook by the door, and the ledger was on the side table where she'd left it, and the cloth doll, which Noah had apparently retrieved from the box and placed on the shelf above the kitchen window, looked out at the room with its button eyes in the particular unsentimental way of objects that have been kept, because keeping them was the only available form of faith. Caleb sat down at the kitchen table. Amelia put food in front of him. He ate. Outside, the October wind moved down from the north, from the mountains where a cabin sat empty now, and crossed the valley and the dark fields of the Whitmore Ranch, and went south. Silas O'Crow was in the county jail, and the charges were building, and Amelia's written account was in the hands of a sheriff who had said without sentiment that it was enough, and who had meant it. It was not finished, it would not be finished until the formal proceeding, until Crow stood in front of a court and the charges were read and answered, until Amelia said in that setting what she had endured, and the law put a name to it. That was still ahead. But tonight, in the kitchen of the Whitmore Ranch, with the food on the table, and the doll on the shelf, and the ledger with its corrected figures on the side table, Caleb Whitmore ate his supper, and the woman across from him did the same, and neither of them said anything for a while. It was for the first time in 2 years a silence that did not weigh anything. It was just quiet. And in the room above them, Noah slept the sleep of a child who had been told, as much as he could handle of it, the truth, and had decided that the truth, even complicated, was something he could build on. The ranch breathed around them. The night held. The trial of Silas Crow was set for the 3rd week of November, 5 weeks after Caleb brought him down from the mountains. Those 5 weeks were not quiet weeks. Nothing about the situation allowed for quiet. In any sustained way, there were depositions to give, documents to review, conversations with Sheriff Briggs and the county prosecutor, a man named Harlan Fess, who was thorough and somewhat humorless, and who had, in Caleb's assessment, exactly the qualities you wanted in a man assembling a criminal case. Fess met with Amelia 3 times. Each time she came back from the meeting tired in a specific way, not physically, but in the way a person gets tired when they have been required to revisit something difficult in precise and accountable detail. She didn't complain about it. She wouldn't. But Caleb noticed, and Dora noticed, and even Noah noticed in the way children notice, things adults are trying to manage silently, with watchful eyes that tracked more than anyone had told them to track. Marcus Vale, for his part, had gone quiet after the hearing. Not gone, he was still in Harlan Creek, still running his operation, still the largest landowner in the county by a margin that gave him structural influence over most of the things that mattered economically. But the particular pressure he had been applying to the Whitmore situation had ceased, at least in its visible form. Binns had not sent any further letters. The men from the Land Commission had not reappeared. Caleb did not believe this meant Vale had reconsidered. He believed it meant Vale was waiting to see what the Crow trial produced before deciding on his next approach. Vale was a patient man when patience served him better than action. But that was a problem for after November. In the meantime, the ranch needed managing, which it always did, and which Amelia had re-engaged with at a pace that occasionally alarmed Doc Reeves when he came by for his self-appointed monitoring visits. She had taken back the financial records completely. She had begun working with the hands on the cattle rotation schedule for the winter months, which required a kind of coordinated planning she seemed to find genuinely satisfying in a way that sitting still never would. She had opinions about the eastern fence line that turned out, when Caleb actually looked at the eastern fence line, to be correct. He told her so. "I can see from the house," she said, as though this were obvious. "I ride that fence line," he said. "You ride it looking at the cattle," she said, "not at the fence." He could not argue with this because it was accurate. The night before the trial, she couldn't sleep. Caleb heard her at 2 a.m, the particular sounds of her awake, not the passive stillness of a sleepless person, but active moving, the sound of her going downstairs. He lay in the dark for a few minutes and then got up. She was at the kitchen table, with a cup of something that had gone cold, the lamp turned low, her hands flat on the tabletop. She didn't look up when he came in, but she didn't seem surprised. He poured himself a cup of the same cold thing coffee made hours ago and sat down across from her. He sat for a while without talking. I've been trying to decide what I'm afraid of, she said eventually. Specifically, I know I'm afraid of something, I just can't isolate it. What are the candidates, he said. She almost smiled at that. The almost smile he'd come to recognize as specifically hers, the real response before the managed one. That I won't be able to say it clearly, she said. That I'll go in there and they'll ask me to describe what those 2 years were, and I'll lose the thread. All those sessions with Fess and I've said it all. I've said it all correctly. But she paused. Saying it to Fess is not the same as saying it in that room, with Crow there. He'll be across the room, Caleb said. I know where he'll be, she said. I've been in rooms with him for 2 years. I know how the space feels when he's in it. Caleb said nothing for a moment. You said something to me? He said the night before the hearing. You said you'd been afraid for a long time, but that the fear had started to feel different. That hope was its own kind of fear. She looked at him. I said that, more or less, he said. She thought about it. That's still true, she said. I'm not afraid of Crow. I haven't been afraid of him since I walked out of that cabin. What I'm afraid of is she stopped. Getting this wrong. Having come this far and losing the thread tomorrow and giving him some kind of argument for a reduced charge or a different outcome. Fess doesn't think that's likely, Caleb said. I know what Fess thinks, she said. Fess is working with the evidence. I'm the evidence. That was precisely put, and he sat with it. You stood in a courtroom a month ago, he said, and you told a judge the story of a wedding night conversation that nobody else on this earth could have known. And you said it quietly, without embellishment, looking at him directly, and the room went so quiet I could hear the stove. You didn't lose the thread then. She looked at the tabletop. That was for me, she said. Tomorrow is for what he did. I know, Caleb said. And that's harder. I know it's harder. He paused. But you wrote it down. You sat at this table and you put 2 years into sentences and you gave it to Briggs. And it held up to everything Fess needed it to hold up to. It's already been said. Tomorrow you're just saying it again. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, he took the straightforward version of my life and made it something I had to fight my way back to. I had a husband and a son and a house and work I was good at, and he erased it. Not violently, not all at once. He just renamed it, called me something else, and waited for me to forget I'd ever been anything different. She looked at her hands. The worst part isn't what he did. The worst part is how long it worked. That for a while, I believed him. That I lived inside the story he made for me and didn't fight it, because I didn't have anything to fight it with. You were injured, Caleb said. You were in a strange place with no memory and no resources and one source of information. That's not weakness. That's just the situation. I know that, she said. I know it intellectually. Here, she pressed 2 fingers to her sternum. It's less tidy. He understood that. He'd had his own version of it, the 2 years of believing she was gone, the gradual hardening, the decision to seal the grief off and function around it. He had believed the wrong thing too, and for the same reason, because the information available to him pointed that way, and he hadn't been given a reason to question it. The difference was that he'd had Noah and the ranch and a life to fill the space. She'd had Crow's version of who she was and nothing else. You came back, he said. Whatever he told you, whatever took hold, you walked south for 3 days on nothing, and you ended up here. That's not nothing. She looked at him across the table. I knew there was somewhere else, she said. Quiet. Tired. I always knew that. Then say that tomorrow, he said. That's the thing he couldn't take. Say that. She sat with that for a moment. Then she picked up the cold cup and looked into it and set it back down. Go to sleep, she said. You're going to be useless tomorrow if you're up all night. I'm up because you're up, he said. I'm aware, she said. I'll come up in a while. He looked at her. Amelia, he said. She looked at him. You've already survived the hard part, he said. Tomorrow is just the accounting. She held his eyes for a moment. Go to sleep, Caleb, she said. But she said it the way she said his name when it meant something more than the words around it. He went upstairs. She came up an hour later. He heard her settle in the room across the hall. And then the house went quiet, and outside the November wind moved through the bare branches of the cottonwoods along the creek, and morning came slowly the way it does in late autumn. Gray and reluctant, and then all at once the light was there. The trial lasted 2 days. It was not a complicated trial in terms of the law. Fess had built the case on the solid foundation of Amelia's written account, Caleb's testimony about the letter in the cabin, Sheriff Briggs's account of Crow's apprehension and his prior history in 2 other counties, and the forensic detail of the scar documentation that had already been entered in the identity hearing. The charges were unlawful detention, coercion, and fraudulent identity suppression, the last of which was a charge that Fess had constructed carefully from several existing statutes, and which the defense immediately challenged on narrow technical grounds. The defense was a court-appointed lawyer named Mr. Duell, who was competent and not without sympathy, a young man doing a difficult job with limited tools. He argued that the circumstances of Amelia's arrival at the cabin were ambiguous, that Crow had genuinely believed the woman had no accessible past, that the situation had evolved over time rather than been constructed deliberately. He was respectful in his questioning of Amelia and did not attempt to destabilize her account, which was either a strategic decision or a personal one. Caleb suspected both. Crow himself said little. He sat at his table with the contained stillness of a man who has decided that the situation has moved past the point where talking helps, and that his best strategy is to take up as little space as possible. Amelia testified on the second morning. Shatton's in the same chair she'd sat in a month ago in the same room, and she looked at Judge Holt when he spoke to her, and at Fess when he questioned her, and occasionally at the jury 12 men from around the county, farmers and ranchers and a schoolteacher, the ordinary cross-section of people who end up deciding these things, and she told the 2 years in the order she remembered them. She said what she'd told Caleb the night before, that she had always known there was somewhere else. She said it simply, without drama, as a fact of her experience. She said that this knowledge was what Crow had most consistently worked to suppress, not her memory of specific people or places, because he couldn't know what those were, but the general sense of elsewhere, the knowledge of a prior life. She said he'd done it through work, primarily, through keeping her occupied with immediate tasks, until the present was too full to leave room for the past. She said he had not been physically violent, which she stated clearly and without visible emotion, because it was true, and because she understood that the truth served the case better than any amplification would. She said that 2 years of having your name replaced and your history denied was its own kind of damage, that it was quiet and it was slow and it did not leave visible marks, which was partly why it worked. But it wasn't complete, Fess said. You retained some knowledge of your prior life. Pieces, she said. A child, a room. The knowledge that I'd been something other than what he said I was. She paused. Couldn't get to those. They were too deep, or they were stored somewhere he didn't have access to. I don't know the mechanism. I just know he couldn't reach them. And when you left, Fess said, what did you intend to do? I intended to go south until I found something I recognized, she said. I didn't have a plan beyond that. I had a direction and 3 days of food I'd been saving, and the conviction that if I stayed, whatever was left of who I was would eventually run out. Courtroom was quiet the way it had been quiet a month ago. Crow was looking at the table in front of him. Duell cross-examined briefly and gently, and accomplished nothing that helped his case, which Caleb thought was probably not Duell's fault. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found Silas Crow guilty on all 3 charges. Judge Holtz sentenced him to 7 years in the state penitentiary, with the technical charge, addressed through an additional sentence, to run concurrent. He delivered the sentence in the measured language of a man who had said difficult things from that bench before, and knew how to weight them. He noted before closing that the case presented a pattern of behavior that Crow's prior history in other counties supported, and that the sentence reflected not only the specific crimes committed, but the willingness to commit them. Crow stood and received the sentence without visible reaction. He was taken out. Amelia watched him go. Caleb was beside her, and he felt her exhale the real one, the one she'd been holding for a month, possibly longer, and he put his hand over hers on the table, and she turned hers over and held it. They sat like that for a moment in the room that was beginning to refill with noise, people standing and talking and moving, the ordinary sounds of a conclusion. 7 years, she said. Yes, he said. She was quiet for a moment. It's not enough for 2 years, he said. It's not. But it's what the law has, she said, not bitterly. Just accurately. It is, he said. She nodded once, processing this, filing it in the category of things that are true and imperfect and must be accepted as both. All right, she said. Let's go home. Winter came to the Whitmore Ranch, the way it always did incrementally. And then all at once, the gradual cooling and shortening of days until one morning you woke up, and the world had changed color completely, and the work shifted accordingly. Amelia moved into winter the way she moved into everything, by learning what it required and then doing it, with the adjustments that experience provided. She was not the same woman who had arrived in Harlan Creek 7 years ago, as a mail-order bride with a trunk and a canvas bag, and an expression that was trying to appear calmer than it felt. That woman had been capable and observant and practical. This woman was all of those things and something else, something that had been earned in the particular way that survival earns things. At full cost, without discount, with full knowledge of what the price was. She still made errors. She still miscalculated things, misjudged situations, got irritated with people, and occasionally with Caleb in ways that were reasonable and sometimes in ways that were not. She still woke up some nights with the particular quality of wakefulness that had nothing to do with the present and everything to do with the 2 years before she'd walked south. Those nights were fewer now. They were not gone. She and Caleb were careful with each other in the way people are careful when they are relearning something they thought they already knew. Marriage the second time, Caleb had discovered, was not the same exercise as marriage the first time, even to the same person. The first time you are learning what another person is. The second time you are learning what you both became while you were apart, and whether those new versions of yourselves can share the same space without losing what mattered about the original. It was not seamless. There were evenings where the conversation stopped somewhere. Neither of them had intended it to stop and didn't easily restart. There were small misunderstandings that had more weight than they should have, because both of them were still calibrating, still finding the distance between what they meant and what they said. But there were other evenings, more of them, as winter settled in, where they sat in the front room, after Noah was asleep, and talked the way they'd talked in the correspondence years, honestly and at length, without performance. Those evenings were the ones that did the real work, not the dramatic moments, not the courtroom or the cabin or the hearing. The ordinary evenings with the stove going and the lamp burning and the particular knowledge that the person across from you has chosen to be there and continues to choose it daily in the undramatic way that choosing actually happens. Noah was thriving. This was not an uncomplicated thing to observe, because thriving looked different than Caleb had expected. It was not the sudden wholeness of a child whose missing piece had been returned. It was something less tidy and more real, a child who had already built a self without a mother, who had established habits and preferences and ways of being in the world that were entirely his own, now navigating what it meant to have her back. He and Amelia worked it out between themselves mostly, in the gradual accumulated way of two people learning what they are to each other. He showed her things: the horses, the ranch's specific geography, the particular rock formation on the south pasture where he went to think. She showed him things in return: how to read the account books, how to see the fence line she could see from the house, how to negotiate with the timber supplier in Billings, who had been overcharging them by 8% for 3 years. He told her once, in December, after they'd been arguing about something minor, and he'd gotten frustrated, and she'd told him he was being unreasonable, that it was strange sometimes. Having her back. She'd looked at him. "Strange how?" she said. "I had a version of you in my head," he said, "for 2 years. The version I remembered." And he paused, not sure how to finish this without making it worse than he meant it. "Different," she said. "More," he said. "Not different. More than the version I was carrying." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're more than the version I was carrying too," she said. "You raised that boy by yourself for 2 years. The man who did that is not entirely the man I left." "No," he said, "I suppose not." "Good," she said. "I don't need the man I left. I need the one who went up that mountain." He sat with that. "That's a generous way to look at it," he said. "It's an accurate way to look at it," she said. "Generous would be pretending the 2 years didn't cost anything. They cost everything. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." She looked at her hands. "But what came out the other side of it, what you are now, what I am now, that's the material we're working with. And it's not bad material." It was, Caleb thought, the most honest thing either of them had said since she'd come back. Not the most emotional, not the most dramatic, but the most true, the kind of true that builds forward rather than dwelling backward. Marcus Vale resolved himself in February. He came to the ranch alone, without Binns or Garrett or anyone else, in the kind of visit that announces itself as different by its very structure. He knocked at the front door, which he had never done before. Caleb opened it. "I'd like to speak to you," Vale said. "Both of you." Caleb let him in. Amelia was at the kitchen table with the account books. She looked up when Vale came in and said nothing, but she closed the ledger and set down her pen, which was its own kind of statement. Vale sat in the chair Caleb indicated. He held his hat in his hands. He looked at Amelia directly, which was something he had not done at the hearing. "I misjudged the situation," he said, "from the beginning. I had financial interests that I allowed to determine my assessment of what was happening, rather than the other way around. He paused. That's not an excuse. I'm not offering an excuse. I'm telling you what happened. Amelia said, I know what happened. Yes, Vale said. I expect you do. A silence. The Eastern grazing rights, Vale said. I've been running cattle on the boundary of those rights for 3 years. I'd like to formalize that as a lease arrangement, paid annually at fair market rate, with a term we agree on. Caleb looked at him. That's all? He said. That's the beginning of what I owe you, Vale said. The rest of it doesn't have a number. He looked at Amelia again. I'm not asking for absolution. I'm asking for a business arrangement that's fair and that acknowledges the situation accurately. Amelia looked at him for a long moment. 3 years back, rent at the market rate that should have applied, she said, and then a formal annual lease from this point forward, with a break clause if either party needs it. Vale looked at her. Agreed, he said. I'll draw up the terms, she said. You can review them with Binns and let us know. Vale stood. He put on his hat. He looked between them with the expression of a man who has done something that cost him something and is not sure whether it cost enough but has decided it is the right place to start. He left without any further conversation. Caleb looked at Amelia. 3 years back rent, he said. He's been using the land, she said, opening the ledger again. Using land has a cost. He knows that. He wouldn't have come here if he didn't already know that was the arrangement. She picked up her pen. The back rent was the apology. The lease going forward is the acknowledgement that things are different now. You were ready for that, he said. I've been thinking about it since November, she said. He was always going to come around eventually. Men like Vale don't persist in positions that cost more than they gain. She made a note in the ledger. He's not a good man, but he's a practical one. Sometimes practical is enough to work with. Caleb sat down across from her. She was writing, already back in the numbers, already working. He watched her for a moment. This was the thing about Amelia, that he had not fully understood 7 years ago, and understood now. She did not heal by stopping. She healed by continuing, by finding the next thing that needed doing and doing it. It was not avoidance. She faced what needed to be faced, as the courtroom had demonstrated, but she did not linger in the wreckage longer than was necessary. She found what could be built from it, and she started building. It was, he thought, the thing that had kept her alive in a mountain cabin for 2 years, and it was the thing that was rebuilding the Whitmore Ranch into something stronger than it had been before she left. Spring came in March. One afternoon, Noah found Amelia at the kitchen garden, crouched in the same patch of ground where he had first brought Caleb to meet her in the October light. She was working the soil, turning it for planting, and he crouched down beside her with the ease of a boy who had claimed the right to be wherever she was. What are you planting? He said. Tomatoes, she said. Too early to put them in yet. But I'm getting the bed ready. You used to grow tomatoes, he said. He said it without the weight of a statement being carefully delivered, just as a fact. She looked at him. You remember that? I remember the smell, he said. In the summer, there was a smell. She looked at the turned earth. I grew them along the south wall of the house, she said, because it gets the most afternoon sun. She paused. Do you want to help me plant them? When it's time. He considered this with the seriousness he applied to most things. Yes, he said. She nodded, and they both looked at the garden bed, and the March light was thin and cool and the soil was dark and ready, and there was nothing dramatic about the moment, except everything. That evening, after supper, after Noah was in bed, Amelia found Caleb on the porch. He was sitting on the step looking at the mountains, the way he sometimes did when there was something on his mind that hadn't resolved into words yet. She sat beside him. The spring night was cold but not uncomfortable. Stars were out. She put his hand on her stomach. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the expression that was not the almost smile, but the real one, rare, complete, the expression she reserved for things she meant entirely. We're going to have another child, she said. He could not immediately speak. He looked at her, and then at his hand, and then at the mountains, and then back at her, and the thing that moved through him was not one thing but all of them at once, the 2 years that were gone, the October storm that had taken everything, Street and Harlan Creek and Noah stopping, and 12 notes of a lullaby, and the courtroom and the mountain cabin, and the long ride north, and the letter on the kitchen table, and all of it, every piece of the accounting, resolving into this moment on the porch with the stars out and the spring cold in the air. Are you sure? He said. His voice was not quite steady. Doc Reeves was sure, she said. I am also sure, September, he thinks. He looked at her for a long time. Amelia, he said. I know, she said. He stopped. I don't have words for this. You don't need words for it, she said. Just hold to it. He nodded. They sat on the porch for a long time, and the mountains stood in the dark the way they always had and always would, indifferent and enormous, and somehow, tonight, not threatening. Just there. Just the landscape of a place where difficult things had happened, and where a life was continuing to be built out of whatever the difficult things had left behind. Noah would need to be told. Caleb thought he would be pleased in the specific way Noah was pleased by things seriously, with full consideration of the implications, and then genuinely, with the kind of enthusiasm that children have when they decide to commit to a feeling. The ranch would go into spring with a different shape than it had gone into winter. The grazing rights lease would be formalized. The account books were in order. The eastern fence line had been addressed. And somewhere north of Harlan Creek, in the state penitentiary, Silas Crow was serving the sentence the law had given him. And Amelia's account was in the permanent record, and the 2 years he had tried to erase had been named and counted and held to the light. She had said to him, in that courtroom, the thing that mattered most, you took 7 years from me, but you never took who I was. That was the lesson of it, if there was one. Not that everything works out, because it doesn't always, and not that love is sufficient, because love alone doesn't keep anyone warm or fight anyone's case in court. The lesson was simpler and harder than that. Identity is not a thing that can be given to you by someone else's version of your story. The people who try to name you against your knowledge and keep you in place and wait for you to forget, they are counting on the forgetting. They are betting that the weight of the present will eventually collapse the past entirely. But something holds, even when you can't access it, even when you can't name it, even when the only evidence of it is a vague and persistent knowledge that there is somewhere else something holds. Something in us keeps the original record even when we can't read it. And when the right person comes, or when you finally find your own way south, that record is still there, waiting to be spoken aloud, waiting to be returned to its rightful owner. Amelia Whitmore had come to Montana as a mail-order bride searching for a life that meant something. She had found it, lost it, survived its loss, and found her way back to it across 3 days of cold mountain terrain with nothing but the knowledge that she was supposed to be somewhere else. That knowledge was not nothing. That knowledge was everything. Caleb put his arm around her on the porch step, and she leaned against him in the particular way of two people who have found a sustainable arrangement with each other's weight. And the spring night went on around them, and the ranch breathed, and the mountains stood, and inside the house the cloth doll with the button eyes sat on the kitchen shelf, and the ledger was closed, and the lamp had been turned down low. The story of the lost bride who came home was not a clean story. It had mud in it, and courtrooms, and a mountain cabin, and a man who believed he could own another person's history. It had a boy who stopped in the middle of a street because 12 notes of a song told him something the adult world had decided to give up on. It had a husband who, when the evidence arrived, chose to believe it, and a woman who walked south. That was enough. That in the end was more than enough.